All right, we will call to order this regular city council meeting of the Pearland City Council for Monday, July the 12th, 2021 at 6:30 p.m. We're going to start first with our invocation and pledges. So if you'll rise, we'll have our invocation by Member Owens and our pledges by Member Perez.
I'll pray for you, Dave.
Surely I need it.
Yeah, I think we'll bring in like the Mayor Emeritus always said that we was going to open up a pipeline up to the Lord. So we heard that for about 39 years. So we're going to do the same thing tonight. So if you would stand with me and bow your heads, and I appreciate it. Dear Heavenly Father, as we come to you today, Lord, we thank you for the many blessings that you've answered for each and every one of us in this city, Lord. We pray for all of the unsettlement that we have all around the nation, Lord, and in the close areas with us that's having in the Houston area that we look through there, and they're up 40%, and all different kinds of things, and shootings and mass. Lord, I ask that you be with the people here, and certainly, Lord, I pray that you be with our first responders here in this city, and to be with our citizens that we have here. Be with us tonight as we have this council meeting. Bless all those that came out, Lord, for this meeting, and pray that you give them a safe travel back to their homes. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Mayor, I've got a good friend of mine, James Galbraith, with Boy Scout Troop number 468. He's going to help me with the pledges tonight. Ready? All right, as loud as you can. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And to the Texas flag. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Thank you, James. Appreciate it.
Good job.
All right, James, thank you for your help on all that, and good luck on your merit badges. And looks like you got some of your friends here as well. So you guys are always welcome to come down here and be a part of our council meetings. In fact, we help out on some merit badges from time to time, so we'd love to have you a part. With that, we're moving forward. We have certification of our quorum. All members are present. Mayor Pro Tem Hernandez is online. All other members are present in the council chambers. With that, we're moving to citizens to be heard. And unless you, if you checked an item for a specific item, new business item, or one of the public hearings, you will speak and address when we get to that issue. Otherwise, if you did not, your comments will be here under citizen comments. And with that, our first one is Mr. Gary Hosmer. If you will, please state your name and address for the record and limit your comments to about 3 minutes. I think we'll have a timer on the screen there that you can help with the countdown. And thank you for being here tonight.
In Texas. I want to speak tonight a little bit on two issues. One is the climate change nonsense that the city council seems to be buying into. In the summer of 1970 was one of the coldest weather in Texas in 1970 for 70 years. Then they called it climate cooling. And in the 80s, they called it climate cooling. In the 90s, they changed it to climate warming. Now they claimed it to climate change. And then they started in on coal. Coal was bad. Let's get rid of coal. Now they want to get rid of natural gas. This climate change is a bunch of nonsense, and the city council seems to be buying into this climate change issue. And I would like you, after, to read the last 4 chapters of Job and the first chapter of Psalms, and a new prospect and who's in charge of the climate. Now I'm going to address the issue here about the city council and the pay raise that was addressed in the last council. I sat through the last council meeting and listened to about pay raises for police officers and city employees. And I think the police officers should get a pay raise. But one thing that I was upset about was bilingual pay for city employees. If I'm a city employee and I'm doing the same job as that other person and I'm helping I'm doing my best. I don't think another person should be able to get more paid than me to help some illegal get a pay raise. I lived in Minnesota for 20 years, and I have a great relationship with the Amish community in Wisconsin, great friends. And I've been in the Amish community, and you go into their communities, and you go to the Walmart store, and German is their first language. You go to the Walmart stores, they don't have signs in German, but they have signs in Spanish. And I don't believe we need to start funding all these social programs for illegal aliens. And that's just the start of it. If you're going to have a program for bilinguals, that's not right. And I would be upset if I was a city employee and there was a bilingual illegal getting help from a city employee, and not a citizen of the United States, not a citizen of Pearland. And I would be upset if somebody's getting more paid than me and I'm doing the same job they are. And I think we need to start putting citizens of Pearland first, Americans first, and stop all these social programs for the illegals.
Thank you, Mr. Hosmer. We're moving forward in our agenda. All the other public comments or forms that we received, whether it's online or in person, are for a specific item on our agenda tonight. So with that, we're moving into our public hearings. We have public hearing number 1. Mr. Orlando, would you place that, just what the reason for our public hearing, and we'll move forward in our agenda.
Sure, Mayor, waiting for that to come up on the screen, but I have it here as well. Public hearing number 1, request by Alan Mueller, applicant on behalf of T&B Alexander Family Limited Partnership, Sue Morrison, 2012 Trust, and Mark Morrison, Trustee, owners for approval for a proposed plan development.
All right, thank you for that. Moving forward, we'll take a staff report.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Let me introduce Mohammed Barima. He is our senior planner, and he'll be providing the report tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Mayor. Members of the City Council, good evening. This first request here is for approval of a zone change from the Old Town Site Mixed-Use District to Planned Development with a base zoning of Old Town Site Residential District to accommodate a proposed residential development for single-family detached homes with a mixture of 2 types, bungalows and row houses on 3 separate tracts of land, totaling approximately 5.6 acres. You may recall the joint workshop that was held by the City Council and the Planning Zoning Commission back in March, where the applicant had received some positive feedback on this PD proposal. Again, this slide that you see on the screen reflect the different tracts of land that are currently undeveloped, and the applicant intends to develop this for residential development. We have received 2 letters of opposition for this request from the residents of the Baker's Landing subdivision, who were mainly concerned about the additional traffic. The slide that you see on the screen is the highlights of the proposed PD, and it contains the different variations and deviations from the base zoning, and mainly setbacks in lot width as well as lot coverage. The applicant, again, this is a slide that shows some conceptual elevations for the proposed development. Again, those are the 2 types, the bungalows and the row houses. Next slide is some views that were taken for those different tracks from different points of view from the adjacent streets, 4 slides, different perspectives for these undeveloped tracks. Next slide is the action by the Planning and Zoning Commission. The Planning and Zoning Commission held a hearing on this proposal at their meeting on June 21st. And after the hearing and the discussion, the commission voted to recommend approval of the request by a vote of 5-0 to 1, with 1 commission member recusing himself from the vote. That concludes my staff report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. We'll move forward to our applicant presentation. If you would, Alan, just make sure you give name and address for the record, please.
Good evening, Alan Mueller with Gromax Development here representing Sullivan Brothers this evening. We're at 4201 Broadway here in Pearland. This is for the next one, so you can put this one down. Thank you.
Yeah. There you go.
All right, appreciate that. Appreciate Johnny on the spot. Appreciate that. Thank you. So as Mohammed mentioned, there was a workshop with City Council and Planning Commission back in March. The PD that came forward was a direct result of that. Everything that's in the PD is exactly what was discussed at that workshop. And so we think this is in line with what everybody is looking for in terms of Old Town site development. There are the Sullivan Brothers is continuing to work with city staff on a development agreement as far as the infrastructure that's needed in order to support this. We expect that'll be coming forward to the council to review in 2 weeks with the final reading of the zoning is our intention. We also know, there's certainly always, anytime there's development, especially infill development, there's concerns about traffic and drainage and those sorts of things. And so those are all being addressed in that infrastructure agreement. And then as these properties are platted, those improvements also get reviewed in more detail, obviously by the city staff before plats are approved. So this evening, with regard to the PD and the zoning, we're looking forward to positive recommendation in line with the Planning Commission. I'll just ask Julie to add anything if she wants to, or if she's here for questions.
I'm here for questions. We believe that our presentation is in line with what we looked for in the workshop. And if there are any questions about it or anything I can do to fill in any additional information, I'm happy to help.
All right. Does that conclude the applicant's presentation?
Yes, sir.
All right. Moving forward with our public hearing, we typically go into for and against comments, but I will call up. We had one request to speak to this on the public hearing, and that is Mr. Paul Eskine. So if you would, Mr. Eskine, name and address for the record, and you're on.
I'm representing also, other than myself, Robin Sims is here with Sims Automotive and Dolores and Joseph Koza. So I'm going to try to go fast if I run over 30 seconds or so, if I could, because we have a few people here. I'm representing Passat Enterprises and Houston Aircraft Instruments, which is located at 2519 Park Avenue. My name is Paul Eskine. I gave concerns to the P&Z, and they forwarded the concerns to the developer and the staff. We have some concerns about the alleyway, our parking lot used as a cut-through, the current infrastructure, the traffic, and the parking. We have been at our location for the last 15 years and look forward to developing, the development of the Old Town site, but don't want it to negatively affect our business. We met with the developer last week, but the details of our concerns need to still be finalized. Number one, the one-way versus two-way alley travel. The developer is leaving that up for the city to decide. We would ask that the alley behind us continue to be two-way from Pear to the end of our property. And after that, the traffic can be directed one way toward Walnut Street. This will keep the main traffic from coming into our parking lot. We use the alley daily for backing out of our parking spaces, commercial trash pickup, delivery services, at times with 18-wheelers. The alley is also concrete for the width of our property, which we installed, and we ask that the city take into consideration if it can be left concrete. Number two, we are concerned with our parking lot, which is connected to the alley, to be used as a cut-through or parking for the homes. The developer has said they will inform the homeowners that this is a private property. They will install up to 4 signs to show it is private property and can be fined or towed, and we'll work with the city and the developer to put the correct wording. Number 3 and 4 and 5 is something that involves Sims Automotive and some of the other businesses in the area. The infrastructure is very poor, as it is very old. There's not any engineered drainage. There are holes in the sewer pipes, and they back up when we have several inches of rain. The developer said they are working with the city and the PEDC about the situation. I believe the city council is well aware of the drainage, sewer, and other infrastructure concerns. I'd ask that whatever decisions made, that our city's engineering department sign off on the plans. Therefore, when the developer is gone, the city's responsible for any additional flooding concerns. Number 4, the traffic will be greatly increased in the area. We understand that a traffic study is being conducted at this time. And finally, number 5, there is concern about the number of parking spaces. I've spoke with several residents and businesses, and we feel that as there is not a driveway behind the garages of the development, the owners will have a very hard time parking 2 cars in the garage. It might not even be workable. Therefore, as there's no parking in the alley, all the parking for the extra cars will be in the front of the homes along the street. We did some rough calculation, and even if every available spot on one side of the street is filled, there was still more needed for the additional cars. As we all know, the households will most probably have 2 or more cars for each home. Where will they park? Overall, we feel that these are reasonable concerns. I would appreciate the city council to take this under consideration, and we ask the council to add a condition to the plan development that the developer and the city work out our concerns before permits are given. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Escon. We're in our for or against this proposed zone change. If you have a comment for or against, you can go to the podium. Second request for those speaking for or against this proposed request. And third and final time, those wishing to speak for or against this proposed request. Seeing none, moving forward, open it up to council for questions, comments, concerns, questions of staff or the developer.
I'd like the developer to address the issues just raised by Mr. Escon.
I don't know that I have a complete list, but as far as the two-way versus the one-way alley, again, there's nothing in the PD that limits it to one-way or doesn't. It's silent. The direction is silent. I think maybe at the workshop there was a discussion about a preference for them being one-way, but again, as Mr. Escon said, that's really the city's preference. We think that they probably work better as one-way, but in that one particular segment where it's being used, if that one needs to be two-way, that's perfectly fine. I believe with regard to the signage on the property, I believe Julie's been having those conversations, and I don't think there's any controversy over placing that signage.
There's not. He would like to have some signs on his own property, just designating that that's a private driveway, and he's going to get some specific language, that's beneficial to him. And we have community signage in our other communities, so we work closely with sign companies, and we could easily do that for him.
Why couldn't a fence be erected to keep any through traffic from going into his parking lot?
I think from what I've seen, their parking lot in the back, they access the parking lot from the alley, so I don't think you could fence that off. And then they have a separate driveway that comes from Park. So I think they're concerned about that driveway from Park Street being cut through. So that's where they'd make sure there was signage on that driveway on the side of their building, as well as the parking on the back of their building.
And I think also they may receive deliveries through trucks and whatnot that need, so obviously fencing it off would be a problem.
Right. Yeah, because they access it directly from the alley.
He mentioned infrastructure. And the plans, making sure plans are signed off on, those types of things.
So the sanitary sewer, drainage, water supply as well, and parking are all part of the development agreement that's being worked on right now. And again, from a practical matter, this project will not move forward until that agreement is in place on the cost sharing of that infrastructure. So certainly have no qualms with making that a condition that a development agreement is done in tandem with.
And if I understand the development agreement, you can't really pull permits until that development agreement is satisfied.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the order, the development agreement would have to be executed. Then all of the design work would have to be done, plan approvals by the city before any permits would be issued.
And the other, I'm just trying to go through the questions that Mr. Little asked. Traffic concerns, additional traffic, and then the last was parking spaces, how to deal with the additional parking of cars.
Right, yeah, and so on the initial part of the application with the city, we do what's called a traffic impact worksheet, which says whether or not you meet the threshold to do a full traffic impact study. And so that threshold was met, and so that will be part of the process before the plat can be approved, is to complete that full TIA. And then the on-street parking would be part of the development agreement with the city to provide some additional lane width so that parallel parking could happen along the affected streets.
Mr. Eckstein, can I borrow you for a second? Can I borrow you for a second? I just want to ask. Yes, sir, please.
Sir.
So, would I be correct in assuming that there's generally minimal objection to the use, but the interactivity of this use with the infrastructure and how that affects your business is your biggest concern, correct?
Correct.
So, what I would maybe request of staff, since they're doing a traffic impact analysis, I think some of these concerns are really in the purview of that and not necessarily in a PD, which really is generally addressing the use, except for some of the infrastructure improvements that they've already acquiesced to. I'd like to see if we can include in the analysis a turning exhibit for a two-car garage into the alleyway to make sure that, say, an F-150 or a truck of that size parked next to each other actually can make that turning movement. That should be a fairly simple thing to do with, with auto turn or traffic analysis in AutoCAD. And Mr. Eckstein, just so I'm clear, it's currently a two-way alleyway, and it's your preference that it remain that way, correct?
It's currently a two-way alleyway, but it ends at our property.
Yes, sir.
From Pear. So I guess our preference, if we had one, was to let it continue to be a two-way. I see the reasoning to control flows where they have. So that's why we said after our property, if it continues to be, let's say, make it a one-way going toward Walnut, we had heard originally from one of the developer members that that might be a preference so that traffic doesn't come from Walnut down there, into the development. So that's the only reason we mentioned that, if I had hey, I get to pick which one I want, certainly we have a reason to have it two-way in front of us or behind us, and so forth. Once it passes our property, it'd probably be best to have it one way, that way the more cars are not coming toward us and then trying to get through our parking lot to go to Park Street. So that's why we said that.
Again, just as part of the traffic impact analysis, if we can study the two-way versus one-way, put it in that purview so it's not too tied into the PD, but we do get this this concern addressed. My general concern would be not just can we sign it, but how can we enforce it? And that's the difficulty. We can certainly agree that a two-way up north of this projected boundary line is okay in one way, and we can sign that, but how do we practically enforce that? And I think that would be our difficulty, because once the signage, look, people ignore stop signs on a regular basis, so it's going to be very difficult for us to make that a practical solution. I think, Alan, maybe if in keeping with the neighbor, with trying to work with the neighbors, if there's maybe some possibility that we can come up with a creative solution, maybe like separating the alleys, not connecting them, and still get the function of the home. That may be a way to address this concern, because I know, knowing y'all both personally, I know that you want them to move forward with their project, but don't want to be negatively reflected. Alan, I know you want to make sure that your project is a good steward and a good neighbor to them. So there's probably a compromise there where the enforceability is still manageable. So I think there's no practical way we can gate off it's one continuous drive. So if we gate it off, that means that your employees are going to have to get out, open a gate, park, and then that becomes a difficulty. But certainly we can encourage signage, have the signage placement be part of the TIA and enforceable as part of the TIA. And then the enforcement mechanism would be complaint driven. As if you see people violating what the signage requests, then unfortunately you're just going to have to tattle on your neighbors. And I don't think you're going to have much concern doing that. So
Alan was correct when one of the council members did say, what about a fence or an opening or something to close it? We back into the alley to get out. A lot of the business next to us, which is not here tonight, they're only about a foot from the alley with their cars. So we have more room. But when they moved in before we did, there's only about a foot before the alley. Their cars back up to the alley. So they have to actually back up. And that's one of the things I think in the, is it OTC, the old town site development?
yes, sir.
That you're able to back into an alley. But that's why a fence would not work in that area. And that's where the trash pickup comes through to go in and get the.
Would it be possible to put in, say, like a fire gate with a Knox box? You could go in there, you could open it up at the start of your business, close at the end of your business. I think you're going to have the most cut-through traffic in non-peak hours as your employees are coming in, less likely. But would that be something that would work for you?
I don't think it would. I know that at times we're there, times at night, sometimes there in the weekend, but for the way that some of our employees come in and such, for them to back out, and go in, it'd be a very hard thing to try to put something there. Like example, when the trash is picked up, you couldn't do it on one night because they come before we even open up to pick up the trash. So they have to be able to open a gate, go in, take the trash, put it back with that machine that they use. So I don't know if that's, be able to be physically possible.
Right. So I think as long as because if there's no physical structure that we can put in, I think what's fair is that we're all in the understanding that we can note that we want there not to that the through traffic not to come through, and we can sign it. But once the developer's done, the homes are sold, and they're no longer a participant to the property, that the only enforcement mechanism is going to be y'all's willingness to call PD and complain that this issue is being violated. So,
Well, and I think it's private property. So, I mean, they would have the ability to sign it so that they could be towed. So I think that would be the intention, is that
100%. But
there would be signage placed so that they could be towed if they were illegal.
But ultimately, we'll sign it, but the burden's going to be on y'all to ensure that it's enforced. Obviously, we can't have patrol there often enough to see, as y'all would see, that there's violation of it. So, I just want to make sure that's clear. Without a physical barrier, it's going to happen. And the only way it's not going to happen is the person who lives there, you're going to complain on them, and they're going to get tickets, and they're going to stop doing it.
Yeah, there's, 5, 6 spots? How many parking spots are there? Somewhere in that.
That's it.
Yeah, and so it's not like a separate parking lot. The spots, they back directly out into the alley.
Okay.
So it's not a separate parking lot that could be fenced or gated.
And would you, Alan, I would presume that you would agree to a condition in the development agreement that all the signage necessary to show these agreements would be purchased and installed by the developer?
That's reasonable, yeah.
Okay, so if we can add that to the development agreement, and then to just purchase the signs in accordance with what is agreed to in the traffic impact analysis, include that in the traffic impact analysis.
Certainly the owner would need to agree with what the signs are going to say.
Yeah. I think y'all are gonna have to work together, certainly, but we want to make sure that there's an agreement that, okay, there's signs, but hey, we're not doing it. And then, there's either the city, there's a miscommunication about who's responsible for it, for that. So that's all I have there.
Yeah, those are the signs for the parking lot, and directly to make sure that that the parking lot is signed for private parking and appropriately, and no cut through traffic.
Member Camcar?
Yeah, Mr. Mueller, you made a comment I wanted to pick up on. There's a cost sharing agreement in the works right now.
Correct.
What is the amount of that? just for the city's benefit that's being discussed?
I'm sorry, I don't have the number committed to memory.
You want to make a guesstimate?
So I'm looking at the engineer's estimate for all of the work is something like 2.2 million. Now, not all of that is subject to the cost sharing agreement, but that's the estimate of the work.
That is one initial estimate. As we've gone through the process, the scope has changed from time to time and is still in flux. I think there's some hydrology still being studied and some items that are being finalized. So I would definitely say that's a minimum number there.
So for that, I mean, it's a significant, it's a 7-digit figure, just for the sake of discussion.
Yes.
All right, and you guys are going to put that amount into the ground to improve the area compared to what it is today. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So, but for this coming to us and happening, that improvement would not come back, correct? Would that reasonable say that?
Yes.
And the city is going to eventually reimburse at some point later on.
Correct.
Yes,
So-
as the development progresses,
Right.
homes are built.
Yeah, and I think housing, as people realize, is becoming more unaffordable. There's not places for our parents, our kids coming back from college to live at. But I think if we're going to give city dollars to repay investment, we need it not to be at the detriment of the businesses that have been here for years and decades. And so I'm very conscious of us needing to get something that's workable. It sounds like the signage on site, that's a no-brainer. It's just what is the language. I really would like to force the hand on the two-way. I'm very sensitive. If you go look back at there, I mean, the images on here don't do it justice. That alleyway is very narrow. And you're going to have all of a sudden a lot of traffic that isn't there beforehand. And now is going to be there residential cars. Let's assume mom and dad leave in the morning, mom and dad come back at night. And it, one way is not necessarily reasonable. So I would like to have that also be a condition of the PD. That's squared out prior to and agreed to.
Absolutely. That's not key to our project. It was just a suggestion early on. We were talking about ways to use alleys in a situation like this. So 2 ways won't be any issue for us.
That sounds amenable then. That's not like a far putt. Okay, great. The other thing I think was on drainage. The site, if you go see, is over here on the lower right corner is the Tom Reed Light. The Tom Reed post office yet? Or is it just the post? It's going to be the Tom Reed post office, right? It's the post office. A lot of people may use it. But there's a field back there now. There's nothing there. And so the water is sheet flowing one way or the other. And businesses, the storms are getting bigger. There's just no 2 ways about it. I would really like to see that drainage plan approved by the city engineer prior to the plats. I don't think that is technically any further than what you really have to go. But I like that monumented, that the residents and the businesses around here know that the city is on board with the improvements that you guys are doing and feel that they are adequately providing for the drainage. Is that reasonable?
Sounds,
Yeah, absolutely. And this area is part of the kind of the sub-regional regional detention that was done. And so the plans that the city is giving to us in terms of the improvements that we need to make are consistent with that study that was done several years ago. So the storm sewers that we're building are conveying a lot of stormwater to comply with that plan. So the storm sewers are much larger than what would be needed just for a typical development.
And everybody here knows my favorite word is drainage and storm sewer. So I'm very excited that you're taking it seriously. And then what's my last thing? On the parking, when you finalize the right-of-way, can we discuss what the plan is for what the right-of-way is today, 24 feet curb to curb, and what it will be? Because the reality is anybody who's living in a townhome area, you do not park behind the townhome. There's just not enough space. And so there will be parking on the street. And so right now people just kind of go through that street, but they don't park a car on the side of it. So can you talk about what is in the graphic so that the public can see that? We may want to pull the schematic for the team. It's in their packet.
Was this the front setback that we're speaking of?
Yes, I'd like to see the schematic with the street scene.
The parallel parking.
Correct. There we go. This is exactly it. Thank you. So can we, Alan, can you just walk us through, I'm assuming you're doing the one to my left-hand side or the one furthest to the left? Is that essentially?
Again, there's different situations depending on where you're at. Galveston is already a concrete street, that's wider. And so I'm not sure which one is which right off the top of my head, but that one has a little bit different situation because there's probably adequate pavement width right there now in order to have that paving. Park is another situation. Again, that's one of the ones it's 2-lane asphalt. And the intention there is that there would be basically a third lane. When the storm sewer gets built, the open ditch can go away, which creates room for basically a third lane.
So if for the people who are uninitiated, what diagram are you talking about there? So people can see that.
Yeah, we're probably looking at the left one, I believe, would be.
Okay, and you see where that car, the cursor is right over that car?
Yeah.
So there's the right of way, and then there's a space for the on-site parking. Because nobody's going to park in the back. They're going to park on the road.
So there where you see the rear of the car, that's the parking. And then there's a blank lane right to the left of that. That would be, say, the northbound traffic. And then where the front of the car is would be the southbound traffic. So there'd be 2 through lanes and then 1 lane for parking. And then Grand Avenue would be a little bit different because it has the median, essentially the same idea.
Okay. And for these people are going to have a place to park. It's not going to be in the alleyway, and we just want to highlight that we are addressing that. I mean, that's a very critical point. The last thing I would say, Alan, is there's not really a place for these people. There's a ball field that you guys are going to plow over and put houses on. There's not really a place for these people or a park, and I'm very sensitive to that. I know that there's park fees being paid, but where are your residents going to go for park right now, assuming we don't make any improvements?
So part of the discussions right now are, again, park fees will be paid, and the Grand Avenue median, basically north of Walnut, is being looked at for some opportunities to improve that with those park fees. Beyond that, there is the Linsky Park, which is just north of Broadway. There is a signalized intersection at Grand. So it's basically a block and a half or 2 blocks to get to that Zielinski Park with the signalized intersection. So that'd be the closest city park.
I'm uncomfortable putting mom on a stroller to take her kids to a park across a major TxDOT right-of-way. I think that's something that we need to address in this development agreement about what do we want. I just not, as somebody who has 3 kids under 4, I'm not crossing my kids across TxDOT to go to a park. Just not doing it. And I think when you put $400,000 homes here, those people are going to want a place to play, and I'm not putting them in the street. So just letting you know, I'm glad you guys are making movement on that, but I think we really have to address that.
Thank you.
Moving over here, Member Orlando, you're unmuted there.
Oh, I apologize. I didn't mean to be.
Okay. Member Carbone.
No, I mean, I think my fellow councilman beat up the public comments pretty good, and I'm excited for the development. I'm excited for that area, and I think the developer and staff know that you're dealing with some old businesses in town that I think us as council want to see not just survive but thrive. So I have full confidence that we'll follow up on these where the time's right, whether that be in the traffic impact or once we start the different engineered plans. Because if we don't, we'll hear from the residents again, and we'll get it worked out. So been there, done that, and but I do look forward to this development.
Yeah, and if I could just check my notes, add a couple closing comments. I appreciate the work that's been done and that we've kind of drained a lot of these issues. But yeah, I think there's an opportunity here to really add something special to the city of Pearland while being accommodating to the concerns of the businesses that have brought Pearland to where it is today. So I think it's important to do both, and I think we're on the path to doing both, and appreciate the efforts by the folks who are already there and the developer coming in and the city staff to make this happen in a way that is best for Pearland. So appreciate all the work by everyone and look forward to seeing what we come up with and bring a resolution to all the concerns shared.
Member Hernandez, I know you're online. I don't see you're unmuted. Not sure if you have any comments.
Thank you, Mayor.
Go ahead.
So I appreciate Member Perez's comment where he had
mentioned doing an analysis to see if we can get both cars into the garage. And I know that we've been told previously that y'all have similar developments to this. Do you have examples of a development that has a similar sized alleyway like this already where vehicles are able to pull into the garage comfortably, or is this going to be something unique?
No, we do have similar sized alleyways in our project in the Heights. It's on Ashland Street and Tulane Street in the city of Houston, which I know is not Pearland, but we have similar alleyways there. We also do have an exhibit that was prepared by the engineer that shows the F-150 sized vehicle backing out. I don't know if that's shareable as part of this presentation, but we can definitely make that available to show the turning radius on that.
Okay, so as of now, I guess it is something that has been done at other developments. I mean, I would still like to see the exhibit for sure, but I'm just curious if that was something that you could put to rest now. Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. And other than that, yeah, I think to Member Carbone's point, the rest of the council has addressed most of the questions that I had written down. And I appreciate Mr. Eskine being there, as well as the other residents that are there in attendance. And that's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions, comments?
City Attorney Coker, if we want to start monumenting some of these extras, the signage on the property as well as the two-way, where's the best place to memorialize that? Can we do that now, or do we want to punt that to the agreement?
That would not be best served in this particular document. If we want to put anything like that, it would be better served in a development agreement, and some of that may not even be best served even in that agreement. It just depends what it is and whether or not council agrees. We haven't really had that discussion to find out if there's a consensus on some of those things, and so I think that needs to be fleshed out as well.
Sounds like most of it should be worked out in development agreement, and then some things are tied back to the TIA, and I think you heard concurrence. I think hopefully staff heard concurrence on some of the TIA items. I don't think we have to vote on that, but I think they heard from enough that those types of items will be in the TIA. But it seems like most of the other stuff would be tied to the development agreement. But, Member Owens, you have something?
Mayor, I think we may take a break and take another short prayer to get through this. No, I've listened to all the comments here by the council members and all very positive comments to it. And going back on the concerns of the drainage, traffic, and the parking and signage, and I think at this point that those have been identified, and I guess, Paul, you've been working with the folks here to get to the bottom of this, and it seems like they're have a workable agreement to it. And so I'm all for it, like Commissioner or Tony's talked about. I think, this is going to be a good development for this area. And I'm sure we'll get through to the bottom of these concerns and get it all worked out.
Okay. All right. Does that complete comments? Staff, do you have any other wrap-up comments?
No additional comments.
Okay. All right. With that, we will close this public hearing. Moving forward to new business, item number 1. Member Orlando, would you place that on the table for consideration?
Sure, Mayor. Consideration and possible action. First reading of ordinance number 2000M-213. So moved.
Wait a minute.
211.
Oh, sorry, I have the wrong one pulled up. Consideration and possible action. First reading of ordinance number 2000M-211. So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. We just had staff report, so we'll move. Any other last questions, comments from council? Seeing none, Madam Secretary will call for the vote.
Member Orlando?
Aye.
Member Carbone?
Aye.
Member Camcar?
Aye.
Member Hernandez?
Aye.
Member Little? Member Perez?
Aye.
Member Owens?
Aye.
The motion carries 7-0 to approve the first reading of ordinance number 2000M-211.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll move forward. Public hearing number 2. Member Carbone, would you just read the purpose for the public hearing?
Thank you, Mayor. Request by Paul Grohman, applicant, on behalf of Musgrave-Grohman Ventures LTD, owner, for approval
of an amendment to the Stonebridge PD. So moved. Well, no motion, a second. This is just the purpose for the public hearing. We're into the staff report.
Go ahead, Mohammed.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Mayor. Well, this is approval for, this is a request for approval of amendment to the Stonebridge Planned Development District to accommodate a proposed residential development consisting of a single-family residential lots with a base zoning of single-family residential district R4 on approximately 32.6 acres of land. We have received no letters actually for opposition to this request. We just had a few callers requesting information on it. Subject property is currently undeveloped, and the site was rezoned as part of the Stonebridge Planned Development. It's the area that's highlighted with the yellow in 2004. Everything in the PD has developed except this property. The property was subject to multiple rezoning in the past. However, the property remains undeveloped. The next slide shows the proposed development, and it's a residential subdivision consisting of approximately 57 single-family lots with amenitized detention pond and open space. Will be served by public streets. The applicant will work with the city staff to find a solution for a required secondary access by the fire code. This is a view of the subject property taken from Staplestone Lane that's off Pearland Parkway. The Planning and Zoning Commission had a public hearing on June 21st, and they voted to recommend approval by a vote of 5-0-1 with one recusal. And that's the staff report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Moving forward to the applicant and your presentation.
Hello, this is Greg Coleman with Beezer Homes, 10235 West Little York in Houston. Good evening, everybody. It is so great, and I'm very excited to be in front of this group again. Beezer Homes has had a long history, great relations with the city of Pearland, and we truly enjoy all of our history that we've had. On to the next. A little background on Beezer Homes. I started with Beezer Homes 20 years ago, and when we started, we were actually in the first development, Silver Lake. We developed a few lots over there in Silver Lake, and we were really involved with Pearland all the way until a few years ago when we literally ran out of lots, and we've been trying to get back here, so I'm very excited again to be here. During the first Edgewater development, Beezer partnered with the city of Pearland on TERS #1, and that was the vehicle that helped expand the facilities to Shadow Creek and to the west side of Pearland as we know it now. And so really started with that relationship, and then we continued on over to the Pearland Parkway area, and where we developed Lakes of Highland Glen and some of the other communities, including Edgewater and Highland Crossing, Highland Park, Pearland Lakes, and just developed in this side of town. And just want to let you know that Beezer Homes has only improved ever since we've come here. We had a great our homes are very well built, energy efficient, Energy Star certified, and our developments we take quite pride in how they look, how they function, and just want to reiterate that we're going to bring the same team of quality consultants on this project. All the drainage details that we've included in Lakes of Highland Glen and some of those other communities will be brought to this, same expertise will be brought to this community. So with that introduction, I will turn it over to Paul Grohman.
Paul Grohman, 4201 West Broadway, Pearland, 77581. I'm here primarily to answer questions you have. We've owned the property for 13 or 14 years. Rest of Highland of Stonebridge has been built out. We've participated with Beezer in half dozen projects in the area. They've all turned out remarkably well. We were ready to move forward to this last component of Stonebridge, and like I say, we're here to answer any questions you may have.
All right, moving forward, we will open up this public hearing for those wishing to speak for or against this proposed request. You can go to the podium and name and address for the record, please. Second call for those wishing to speak for or against this proposed request. And third and final time, those wishing to speak in favor or against this proposed request. Seeing none, we'll move to council questions, comments, concerns, questions for staff or the applicant.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I'd say no opposition to the use. I think this is what it was intended to be. Unfortunately, the hospital fell through, but in the end, I think this is probably the best use of the land. And again, what the PD was originally desiring. So I'm okay with moving forward. I think, I think generally the concern would be the secondary means of egress. Vance, if I could just pick your brain for a second. Well, actually, let me ask, Paul, do you have an agreement in place with the developer or with the owners of the strip center in front of us to get mutual access?
Yes, sir, we do. We put that in place when we found out that the then city planning director, not the current city planning director, didn't follow the rules and give us a stub to the north. So yes, sir, we have it in place.
So besides that, so you have a mechanism to get a fire lane along what's the detention pond C. I assume you do like a grass pave or some sort of.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we should be in good place there. 'Cause I think the development's going to be contingent upon that. And Chief Rowley, I would presume that would be amenable to the fire marshal's office. Or are we too soon to be able to make that claim?
I haven't had time to review this personally, but I know the fire marshal's office has been working with community development to come to a resolution on how to reach something amenable.
Okay. I think it's assuming that's in place. I think that would be the only concern with the park space. The park space that's in section, I believe that's section 6. That's to the west. Would that park space be contiguous, or would that be fenced across? On the west side, you've got park space that abuts park space and Lakes of Highland Glen, section 6. I think that's.
Well, that would be fenced off. I mean, we wouldn't have any access to that. If it had been followed the rules at the time, we would have had some kind of 911 gate, but we haven't approached the homeowners. We think that's probably just a tough sell because they have existing
to connect those two parks.
Yes, sir.
Okay. That's all I have. Those are the only questions.
Okay. Mr. Camcar?
Gentleman from Beezer Homes. I should know your name. We're in the industry. And I just
Coleman. Greg Coleman.
How many homes are you planning to build on this 30 plus or minus acre site?
58.
How many?
58.
Are these going to be 50-foot wide, 60-foot wide? Are these townhome?
Yeah, they're gonna be 55.
Okay, that's fine. As the staff reviewed, that there's a gigantic part of Clear Creek at the eastern edge of this parcel. I don't know if the public can see in the yellow, but it's on Clear Creek. Have we reviewed kind of how much acreage we're dedicating to the river, so to speak?
The applicant's design plan indicated a portion of that to be dedicated back for Clear Creek.
Do you have a rough idea of how much of that 32-acre site is, generally speaking?
Paul or Greg, do you
I'm
know
making
how
sure
much?
that I understand your
acres.
question.
Mr. Camcar, I'm speaking from memory. I believe we're
Like
dedicating
5.
about 7 acres.
Yeah,
is
it's
what I believe.
7 acres.
It's 3.4 acres on the design plan.
300 foot wide, yeah.
All right. This is a very sensitive area, and if the team on the staff side believes that this is adequate, considering the conditions are changing, we don't have the Harris County flood control data for the 2D models. We have areas along Clear Creek that more or less need to be torn down. If the builder is comfortable and they're adhering to the standards, I'm not going to get in the way, considering the price of housing is becoming a luxury item, and it shouldn't be. But I would be very, very sensitive to those items. I'm just letting that be known.
Understood.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, we will call this public hearing to close. Moving forward in our agenda for new business item number 2. Member Carbone, would you place that on the table, please?
Thank you, Mayor. Consideration and possible action, first reading of ordinance 2000M-212. So moved.
Second. We have a motion and a second. We've had our staff report. We've had questions and comments from our council, so we'll call for our vote. Madam Secretary?
Member Carbone?
Aye.
Member Camcar?
Aye.
Member Hernandez?
Aye.
Member Little? Member Perez?
Aye.
Member Owens?
Aye.
And Mr. Orlando is not in the chamber. So the motion passes 6-0 to approve the first reading of ordinance number 2000M-212.
All right. Moving forward in our agenda, we have public hearing number 3. Mr. Camcar, would you place this, read the reason for the public hearing?
Public hearing number 3, a request by Nita Christian, applicant on behalf of R West Development, owner, for approval of a zone change from the single-family residential R2 district to the general commercial district on approximately 0.72 acres of land to wit. So moved.
All right, it's not, thank you for the purpose of the hearing. Before we move forward, we did get a request from Nita Christian to speak. Is she online? Okay, I'll get to her in just a minute. I just want to make sure she's queued up when we get to it. Moving forward, asking for the staff report.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a request for approval of a zone change from single-family residential R2 district to general commercial zoning on approximately 3/4 of an acre. This is a remnant piece of an existing tract that was zoned for non-residential. It's the triangular area in the slide there. We have received one letter of opposition to the request from a resident of Town Lake, states that single-family subdivision to the east. The subject property is zoned R2 and it's currently undeveloped. The applicant seeks to combine this tract with the adjacent tract to develop the site for an office. Subject property is designated on the future land use plan as a medium density residential. The slide that you see, that's taken looking back into that property, and you see the Town States subdivision in the background. Planning and Zoning Commission held a hearing on this request on the 21st of June. And after the discussion, the commission voted to recommend approval of the lesser intensive zoning classification of office professional than the requested general commercial zoning by a vote of 6-0. And that concludes staff report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Is the applicant online to give a report?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, this is Nita Christian on behalf of R West Development at 6302 Broadway, Suite 200, Pearland, Texas, 77581. As was stated on June 21st in the Planning and Zoning meeting, we agreed that we would change to the office professional instead of the general commercial.
Okay, does that complete your applicant presentation?
Yes,
Okay, all right.
that is.
Thank you, Nita. With that, we'll move forward for those wishing to speak either in favor or against this proposed request from the audience. Second request for those wishing to speak in favor or against this proposed request. And third and final time, those wishing to speak in favor or against this proposed request. All right, moving forward in our agenda, council questions, comments. The only one I had, and we certainly can address it in the new business item behind it, is we'll have to, the write-up still shows GC, so will we have to make an amendment, or when we put it on the table as OP?
Yeah, since it's on there as GC, we'll have to do that and then put it on the table as it currently is, and then we'll have to amend it.
Got it. Okay. That's all I had as far as questions or comments. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, we will adjourn this public hearing, number 3, and move into new business item number 3. So, Mr. Camcar, would you place that on the table for consideration?
Yes, Mayor. Consideration possible action, first reading of ordinance number 2000M-213. So moved.
We have a motion and a second. We've had staff report. We've also had questions, comments from both council. So the Planning and Zoning Commission did, as mentioned, voted, I think it was unanimously for OP, and the applicant has agreed to the office professional. As far as that's concerned, the office professional does give some additional help to the neighborhood next door as far as a less intense use. So I think that's the reason why it was mentioned. So not sure if the council wants to concur with planning and zoning or not, but it would take an amendment to this to make it happen.
So I would move that we amend the motion to concur with planning and zoning's recommendations.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to amend this action to call for this to be office professional or OP instead of GC. Any questions, comments on that amendment? Seeing none, Madam Secretary, would you call for the vote? And this is on the amendment, changing this to office professional.
Member Perez?
Aye.
Member Owens?
Aye.
Member Orlando?
Aye.
Member Carbone?
Aye.
Member Camcar?
Aye.
Member Hernandez?
Aye.
Member Little? The motion carries 7-0 to strike general commercial district and replace it with office professional.
All right, so now we're back to an amended motion on the table, now making it office professional. For those wondering, yeah, we're doing this twice because that's the way the rules are stated for us to do that when we're amending a motion. So any other questions, comments? Seeing none, Madam Secretary will call for the vote on office professional.
Member Camcar?
Aye.
Member Hernandez?
Aye.
Member Little? Member Perez?
Aye.
Member Owens?
Aye.
Member Orlando?
Aye.
Member Carbone?
Aye.
The motion carries 7-0 to adopt the first reading of ordinance number 2000M-213 as amended.
All right, thank you for that. Moving forward to public hearing number 4. Member Little, would you read into the record the reason for the public hearing?
Mayor, before that, I'd like to state for the public record, I have a potential relationship with the developers. They've asked my firm prior to knowing I was on council to participate. For that reason, I'm going to recuse myself from this discussion and vote. It's not true. You miss me every moment.
Thank you for that.
Public hearing number 4, request by M. Nadeem Batla, applicant, on behalf of CAFM OPCO LLC, owner, for approval of a conditional use permit for market/open air use within the light industrial M1 district to accommodate a food truck park located within the Kohl's Antique and Flea Market on half an acre of land to wit.
All right, thank you for that. We're into staff report. And for the record, my last name is Cole, and I have nothing to do with Kohl's Flea Market. I never have. So if you ask me, you owe me a nickel. So anyway.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
This is a request for approval of a conditional use permit for a food truck park within the Kohl's Antique Shop and Market in the light industrial M1 district. The applicant proposes to develop a food truck on a half an acre within that Kohl's Antique and Flea Market located at 1401 North Main Street. The proposed food truck will operate 7 days a week from noon until midnight. Staff has not received any comments regarding this request. The slide that on the screen shows the boundary of the flea market, and the red area is the area of the proposed food truck. Subject property is designated on the future land use plan as a light industrial. These photos have been shot from Main Street. From Main Street, looking back into this property. The Planning and Zoning Commission took this request on their meeting on June 21st. After the hearing, Commission discussed the previous attempts to come up with regulations for food truck parks, the need to apply this property, discuss traffic, parking, and the end express general support for the proposed food truck park. And the slide that you have on the screen is a conceptual exhibit of how this is going to be laid out, as well as another perspective on the food truck park itself. That concludes staff report, Mayor.
All right, thank you, Mohammed. The applicants are here. Applicant presentation. Please state your name and address for the record, and welcome.
Thank you, council members, Mr. Mayor. My name is Lincoln Hoffman. I'm with United Flea Markets, the parent company for Kohl's. We purchased Kohl's back in December, and if I could, I'd like to talk about our company for just a brief minute. Kohl's was our 15th flea market that we purchased recently. We are in the process of acquiring markets across the country, and in the process of doing that, we go in and reinvest back into those markets. Typically, flea markets tend to be a little rundown, a little neglected, and our flagship market out at Mile High in Denver is, a really beautiful facility. It's got amusement rides, it's got full concessions, it's got entertainment, and we understand that there's been some friction with the Kohl's flea market historically, and we really want to take steps to make sure that we partner with the city and make the necessary improvements to the market itself, because it's right as you enter into the city of Pearland. It's the first thing you see off that beltway, and quite honestly, it is a beautiful market. It needs some love. So in doing this, we've partnered with Nadeem here to start bringing in the food truck park. And that'd be kind of our first phase in the rebuilding of that market and turning that eyesore around a little bit. So I just wanted to speak a little bit, kind of give you a brief history of who we are, a little bit of what we do. But our sole intent is to really improve this property. It's been a part of the community for decades, and we want it to be an integral part of the community. So that's who we are, and a little bit about the
Hello, council members and Mr. Mayor. My name is Nadeem Batla. I'm the owner of World Food Trucks in Orlando, Florida. My address is 9502 LaVille Court, Windermere, Florida 34786. We've got a development agreement with the Kohl's Flea Market to bring a food truck park to Pearland, Texas. We have submitted that for CUP approval. Staff approved it. Planning and Zoning approved it as well. If City Council or the Mayor have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them at this time.
Wonderful. We will be to those questions if there's any in just a second.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for being here.
Yes, sir.
And moving forward in our agenda, open it up to the audience for those wishing to speak for or against this proposed request. Second time for those wishing to speak for or against this proposed request. Then third and final time, those wishing to speak in favor or against this proposed request. Seeing none, we'll move to council questions, comments, and concerns.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I've ever heard beautiful, the word beautiful used to describe that location out there, but I'm glad there's going to be some improvement in the area, because it is an eyesore, and it's, like you said, it's one of the main corridors into Pearland, and that's the first thing you see. So I'm really happy that you're going to be improving the property, and I don't have any problem with a food truck.
Yeah, I was sitting up here years ago when we talked about that first time the fire marshal went out there to do some investigation. Had 1,140 citations that was written out there during that period of time. They were using rainwater to wash dishes and make food out there. A couple of things, I guess, in addition to the trucks, you're going to do some work out there to reuse those facilities, or what? How's that going to be worked out?
I'm sorry, could you clarify, sir?
Yeah, I know you're talking about the food trucks out there, but what's out there right now, and the little shops and what have you? Are you still going to have those, or is it just going to be food trucks?
No, the intent is to keep the flea market proper and then add this food truck component to the market. So this would be, our intent is to kind of bring this in as the first phase and revitalizing the property itself. We know that we have an existing settlement agreement that we inherited from acquisition. So there's a few outstanding items that we're going to have to cure during the permitting process. And then on top of that, too, our intent is to operate a nice, clean, family-fun facility. So making improvements to the physical structures themselves, renovating the bathrooms, renovating the food stands, just general property cleanup. We intend to reposition and restructure the entrance. Right now, you have to basically make a U-turn off Telephone Road, and it backs all the way up to the Beltway. So as part of the food truck park, we're doing the traffic impact analysis. We're going to incorporate the ingress and egress into the market itself to try and improve that traffic.
Are any of the trucks going to sell alcohol?
No, sir. We hold the liquor license at the market. We'll be the sole.
Okay, yeah. That was my concern and on that also. And then being open till midnight. Is that 7 days a week you won't be open to midnight?
Conceptually, right now, that's what our intent is. Again, we're in the development phase and planning phase now, so that was the idea. And
okay.
He could probably speak to that. He has a food truck park out in Orlando.
Yes, sir. So the operating hours in Kissimmee are actually even later until 2 a.m. What we have found is the food truck customers seem to be coming quite late. So our peak hours are actually between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. They're certainly not required to be open till 2 a.m., but midnight seems to be as late as people do like to come out and partake of food truck.
Well, that seems like a long time to be open at night, to be quite honest with you, and that's sitting at the gateway of Houston coming into Pearland. And so there's a lot of concern about that in there. But and I'm assuming if you're open till 12 o'clock at night, that you have plenty of our police department staff out there.
Yes, sir.
Working at all times through there.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. In fact, in Kissimmee, we have 8 armed security guards working 7 days a week until 3 o'clock in the morning. We also have 2 off-duty Osceola County Sheriff's Department officers working Friday, Saturday, and Sunday until 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. Okay, because we've seen an increase, and I say that for crime in the Houston area has gone up 40% since December of 2020, and that is a big concern. And that being a gateway for Houston to come into Pearland is in that particular area. So
yes, sir, absolutely. We completely understand that just a few knuckleheads coming in and wanting to cause a problem can destroy it for the community and for the business. So that's why we believe in an overwhelming show of force at our food truck park in Orlando.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions, comments? Mr. Orlando?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So I just wanted to clarify, we had a lot of public discussion about this a few weeks back, and I think there might have been a little bit of misunderstanding. If I could get some clarification, it seems like the entire business model of United Flea Markets is to go into these markets that are considered an eyesore, that haven't had the TLC and investment that they might need. And literally that's your whole value proposition, is we come into these flea markets that have not been cared for, and we turn it from maybe something that detracts from the community into something that a community can be proud of. Is that a kind of an accurate representation?
Yes, we feel that that's an accurate representation. It's, our sole purpose isn't to find the most beat up market out there and get it, but just kind of as a general rule across the country, a lot of markets are family owned, they're family run, and they take care of this best they can. We, as a larger corporation, have more resources, and we're able to actually go in and reinvest into facilities. And it is important to us, all of these markets across the country are, pillars of their community. They've grown up with the cities around them. And a lot of them have fallen into disrepair. So, that is a big part of our business model, is to bring the facilities up to code and standard. And our model too is we want to offer that family fun environment for everybody to come out on the weekends and enjoy their time, while also providing a venue to be an incubator for thousands of small businesses. We provide a venue for people to take care of their family. That's important.
Absolutely. No, appreciate that. And Mr. Botla, is your kind of business model is you operate, obviously your park in Kissimmee, but you operate out of flea markets. You don't do standalone food truck parks. Is that correct?
We actually have one at a flea market in Kissimmee. We're opening others that are not directly attached to a flea market. One downtown Orlando, one Daytona Beach, Florida, one South Beach, Florida, and then another in Dallas.
Gotcha. Understood. Okay. Yeah. Just wanted to make sure I had that understanding. But it seems like the feedback that I got a lot of in discussing this was, hey, I love the idea of a food truck park. Maybe this isn't the best location for it. It seems like that's kind of what you're specifically thinking is we want to make this a better location. And we're aware that maybe there are people in the community that you diplomatically use the word friction, but that there are perceptions of this flea market that we are trying to change, and that this is kind of the first step into really making this something that's a better first foot forward for Pearland when you turn in off the Beltway.
Absolutely.
So no, I appreciate that, and no, as was said by members of the council up here, I think we do need revitalization specifically on that tract of property, and appreciate that there is investment coming in to do that. So thanks for answering my questions, and thank you, Mr. Bala, for being in from Florida. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Any other member Camcar?
I'm sorry, gentlemen, in the black coat, what was your name, sir? I apologize.
Lincoln Hoffman.
All right, Mr. Hoffman, I just want to ask a couple questions about the business model. Is this traditionally something buy, hold, or is this like a fix and flip for your business model traditionally?
Oh, no, absolutely not. We currently are the largest flea market ownership group in the world. We're the only ones doing this right now. And there's very good reason for that. It's hard. Every single one of these markets is uniquely different. They're all in different geographic locations, different demographics. It's exceptionally challenging to consolidate these markets under one umbrella. But to answer your question, we absolutely are in this for the long term. Our acquisition and growth path is approximately 5 new markets every year. That's existing, and then we have plans for new development and greenfield, build up from the ground.
Is there a rough approximation of how much investment goes into the rehab and getting up to par for a facility like this? Is there a rough number that you guys look at in CapEx?
Yeah, so it varies. It vets out to about anywhere between 5 and 10% of the NOI gets reinvested back in capital projects. With this particular property, we actually set a significant amount of money aside during acquisition for the sole purpose of revitalizing the property.
Is that a 6-figure number or a 7-figure number, considering the dilapidated condition it's in now?
It's close to a 7-figure number.
No, I'm happy. I'm glad to hear you're going to put maybe $1 million into something that's nice for. Like, that's creative. So looking at the diagram, if we can pull up some of these renderings here, I ask that because you made some points here about this is the front door. What is the streetscape going to look like facing the right-of-way? I don't see a lot of trees in these renderings. I'm not saying that's the end-all be-all, but a bunch of tents isn't exactly the answer either. And so I'm trying to understand, how are you screening the site?
Honestly, I think this is just kind of the conceptual phase right now. We haven't gotten to the design, construction documents, permitting, anything like that. We're open with the city suggests and recommends and would like to see, we would absolutely like to help improve that frontage road and that, that first look as you come across the market. But as I was saying too, you can kind of see it on the layout with the turn in. The current admissions makes you U-turn up, and our plan in conjunction with this is to reconfigure the admission so that it goes straight into the market, and then kind of create that grand entrance too, so that it's clean and fresh and crisp, and it just looks a lot better. So.
Can the staff pull up the rendering that has the trucks in the foreground? Kind of a side view.
Give me just a moment.
Sure. The overhangs, what color are those normally? Do those change site by site, or do they just pick red? This particular set of renderings.
In Kissimmee, they are red. It stimulates the appetite. It's very visible, which is why we use red.
The only reason I say that is because as a development professional who makes playgrounds, the red bleeds out the most after a year or two in the sun, and then it starts to look really, really crappy. And so I just knowing you're going to have to fix those tents every 3 years.
We do swap out our umbrellas on a biannual basis. Every 2 years, we swap out our umbrellas.
Yeah, and that, just so that the citizens can kind of see the visual. There's no trees on the screening there. I'm not saying there needs to be a million, but the streetscape, from what you see, anything's going to be better than what's there today. It's very clear.
Right.
It just a little bit of greenery probably goes a long way until we clean up. And then on the safety thing, I would just, the staff, I don't know how we codify what we're looking for, but I'm very sensitive that Harris County's across the street, and Harris County doesn't enforce their own laws, lets criminals run free, and that's really the front door. And as we become a place where people are congregating, crime just follows. And so I'm just very sensitive to that, and we'll be looking at that when we look at the development agreement. On any improvements, I would actually go to the city and the PEDC and see what you can do, because I think this would actually be something that I would be supportive of giving some kind of reimbursement. We give reimbursement for stuff that's less important. So I would make that ask.
Yes, we will do. Thank you, sir.
Any other questions, comments? All right, thank you, gentlemen. Go ahead.
Just a clarifying question for some of the food truck owners here in Pearland, that this is for the, I guess, park itself, and so you will be providing spaces for local food truck operators to sell their food, correct?
That is correct, yes. So the way we run it is our food trucks are permanent fixtures on the property. We provide them electric, potable water, grease traps, dumpsters, commissary kitchens, pantry space, used cooking oil, recycling. So it is a one-stop permanent shop for the food trucks. If they do wish to come and go for different events, we demand that they do it outside of business hours. That way we don't have an interaction between pedestrians and vehicles. So if somebody wanted to attend a food truck park in Houston proper, they would have to do it outside of our hours of operation. They'd have to leave before we open for business. They'd have to return before or after hours as well.
Okay, this is a follow-up, I guess, for staff. Does our current code allow for, I mean, I haven't heard of a permanent food truck situation yet. I mean, are we good looking forward to something like this?
So just our code doesn't really speak to a standalone food truck park. What allows this food truck park here is it's tied to the flea market and what a flea market is defined as and allows. So in Pearland, this is really the current method to allow the food truck park to come into a place. We have had discussions on drafting a new food truck park ordinance to address the city as a whole. But currently, this would be the only avenue for a food truck park in Pearland.
Right.
Okay. And aside from that, though, we're comfortable with like on-site, oil handling, stuff like that. Like there's, I'm assuming the discussions have taken place and you're comfortable with this.
Yes, we've had discussions with multiple staff, including Public Works, and when we get to the permitting stage, those will all be reviewed, those issues will be reviewed and be addressed prior to permit approval.
Okay, and then I would just like to also add to kind of echo Member Kamkar's comments, any additional greenery, I mean, even something that's integrated into what we see here would be better than really nothing. Obviously, it's been beaten to death that this is the entrance to the city, so whatever we can do to make it more appealing from the road would be favored for sure. But that's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Hernandez. That seems to conclude our comments and questions from council, so we will close this public hearing. And moving forward to new business item number 4, Member Little, would you place that on the table for consideration?
Yes, Mayor. Consideration and possible action resolution number R 2021 CUP 21-00017. So moved.
We have a motion and a second. We've had staff report and questions and comments from the council.
I have maybe just one more that I just, in reviewing the website, like the food truck park, do we have any chance of getting the amusement park anytime in the future?
It's floating around the back of my head. So
Gotcha.
yeah, absolutely.
I
My
think
intent.
we're working on more entertainment options, so that would be.
Yeah, big time. I mean, this is a perfect venue for that. I don't know if you're on the Mile High website right now.
Yeah.
It's
Looks
like
cool.
Going to the county fair, it's a phenomenal park. So same concept, same idea. We'd love to bring in kid amusement rides, maybe a little bit bigger ones, eventually down the road. First we want to get the front taken care of, take care of any outstanding issues that haven't been resolved from the past, make sure safety's good. But yes, the intent is to just make it more of a family environment.
Awesome. Glad to hear that, and we'll be supportive of any future endeavors where we can bring more entertainment options. So thanks a ton.
Just for the staff, what is the process for where we're going after we approve this? What else do they need to do to get operational?
So after the conditional use permit is voted on, next the applicant will go back and work on their commercial plan set. In that meantime, they will probably plat the property as well, so that way they don't end up getting into an issue where the commercial permit comes before the platting. Afterwards, staff will review it, make sure that the corridor overlay district or any other triggers to development are taken care of, and then they will get a permit, assuming that everything is good to be approved, and will go out for construction.
I would just heavily encourage you to call the PEDC if you're going to do an amusement park, possibly in the future. It's a lot better than what's there now.
Yeah.
There's going to be other opportunities to see you in the future, but we're very much encouraging of this. I think that if we having real people are putting private dollars as opposed to public dollars, and they're serious, we want to encourage that. So.
Yes, sir.
All right. Any other questions, comments on the actual CUP? So seeing none, Madam Secretary, we'll call for the vote.
Member Little?
Aye.
Member Owens?
Aye.
Member Orlando?
Aye.
Member Carbone?
Aye.
Member Kamkar?
Aye.
Member Hernandez?
Aye.
The motion carries 6-0 to adopt resolution number R 2021-CUP 21-00017.
All right, moving forward in our agenda to the consent items. I think we're bringing, Member Perez back in. Actually going to call on you to present the consent agenda. I know we're going to pull item D at your request. And you have one? A? The minutes?
Alpha and Delta.
Alpha and Delta.
All right.
Said D.
A and D. All right. Consideration, possible action, consent agenda items B through I, excluding Delta. So moved.
Second.
I said B through I.
We have a motion and a second. Madam Secretary will call for the vote.
So real quick, can we clarify, is that A?
All items
and-
except for.
All items except for Alpha and Delta.
Thank you. Member Perez?
Aye.
Member Owens?
Aye.
Member Orlando?
Aye.
Member Carbone?
Aye.
Member Camcar?
Aye.
Member Hernandez?
Aye.
Member Little? The motion carries 7-0 to adopt consent items A through I, with the exception of consent items A and D.
With no objection from the council, I would like to go ahead and just take the consent items that we pulled out of order and go ahead and move up. And the reason is, one of them was pulled just for a clarification in the minutes, and then the other one was pulled because Member Perez needed to abstain on item D. And I know the recipient of that contract is in the audience and shouldn't have to wait to the end of the meeting to dispose of that. If y'all concur, we can take those out of order. Okay. Member Perez, go ahead and present item number A, please.
Yes, sir, Mayor.
Ray.
What is the, 1 second, Mayor.
It's up.
Consideration possible action, approval of the minutes for City Council regular meeting on June 28th, 2021. So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Not sure if we need a staff report. I know we had a question about about a part of the minutes, so I just wanted to clarify.
Just for the benefit of the council and the public, so this is our meeting from June 28th, which the Evergreen compensation study was discussed for the staff. If you can pull up the clicker on the minutes and then roll down to number 5 under that document. And essentially what happened was we had a great presentation. A gentleman from Tallahassee came in, kind of explained where are we today, where we kind of may need to go. And then there was a discussion for Mr. Carroll, who represents the PPOA, about some of the cities that were involved. And I think that there was a consensus that there was 2 or 3 cities that probably needed to come in and maybe have some of that data looked at. And I just kind of wanted monument that was more or less a consensus that looking at that data is something that we may want to do. I just want to notate that in the minutes.
Okay. You have specific cities, if you recall, noting that, and I don't know if there'll be any objections from
I think one was League City and one was Baytown. I don't remember the third mayor. So I would just say that there was 3 other cities to be added as part of the review.
Okay.
So, do we have that to review?
So in the minutes, you mean you just want to get that clarified? Yeah.
Yeah, so I want to click on it and I want to amend the minutes to reflect that comment.
Yeah.
It was a discussion item. It was not something that we actually voted on. Number 5.
Number 5, yeah. So I'd like to make a motion to add under the item with Mark Holcomb. I'd like to make a motion. A discussion was had to include 3 additional cities from the PPOA to be reviewed.
So we have a motion to amend the minutes to add that. We have a second. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, we've amended that. Madam Secretary, you may have a question about that.
I do have a question. So is it 2 cities or 3 cities? Because I heard 2 at first. Okay, so League City, Baytown.
I didn't want to notate the cities because I don't know the for sure 3, but I remember there was 3 cities. I just don't know the names, and so I don't want to be more definite than 3 cities.
That's fine. Thank you.
So we have a motion and a second. No questions or comments on that. Madam Secretary will call for the vote on the amended motion.
Member Perez?
Aye.
Member Owens?
Aye.
Member Orlando? Sorry.
Yes or no?
We have 2 yeses.
restate the amendment?
Yeah, he's amending the minutes on the Evergreen contract to add, there was discussion about adding 3 additional
Right.
cities in the.
I'm comfortable doing that, so aye.
Member Carbone?
Aye.
Member Camcar?
Aye.
Member Hernandez?
Aye.
Member Little? The motion carries 7-0.
All right.
That was the amendment, correct? So now we have to vote upon the motion.
Now we have to vote on the amended motion. Madam Secretary will call for the vote.
Member Perez?
Aye.
Member Owens?
Aye.
Member Orlando?
Aye.
Member Carbone?
Aye.
Member Camcar?
Aye.
Member Hernandez?
Aye.
Member Little? The motion carries 7-0 to adopt the amended motion, amended minutes.
All right, we'll go ahead and do item D. Member Owens, would you present item D as in Delta, please?
Delta D. Consideration possible action on resolution number R2021-131. I so move.
We have a motion and a second. Staff report. Real quick.
Mayor and
Oh,
Council,
and real
just a
quick,
small amendment to the contracted inspection services, just to account for some overflow work. Nothing to add.
Mayor, in keeping with the new established guidelines, I'm abstaining from this vote as I have an existing business relationship with the vendor.
Fair enough, and that's the reason why you pulled it, and I didn't want to hold it up and penalize the vendor for being here another couple of hours, so. Anyway, any other questions, comments? Seeing none, Madam Secretary will call for the vote.
Member Owens?
Aye.
Member Orlando?
Aye.
Member Carbone?
Aye.
Member Camcar?
Aye.
Member Hernandez?
Aye.
Member Little? The motion carries 6-0 to adopt resolution number R2021-131.
All right, thank you for that. We're going to swing back to new business continued, item number 5. Member Orlando, if you would present that, please.
Consideration and possible action, first reading of ordinance number 1595-2. So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Good evening. This is the budget amendment number 2, as was stated. This comes at this time of year. We do a budget amendment right after the beginning of the fiscal year for carryovers. And then at this point in the year, when we recognize as sort of a pre-budget process, square up some of the major differences between when you adopted the budget back in September. Mr. Roche has a brief presentation to give you an overview of those.
Good evening, everyone. So this is the second of the budget amendments that we do every year. First one comes through in the fall. It's a lot of carryovers. This is the last one that we'll do this year. This is kind of tying up loose ends, projecting out where we think we're going to be at the end of the year. And it's also instrumental in getting us into next year's budget, which we'll be back sooner than you know it with that. So tonight's purpose, right, this is a regular budget amendment. This happens every year. This isn't an emergency or anything like that. This will more accurately reflect our position since the budget was adopted back in September 2020, and then we had those carryovers like I mentioned, and it's about aligning our spending with our current resources. So if you remember back in February 27th, we did the budget kickoff. We've gotten budgets submitted from the departments. We've gone through those budgets. We've met with each of the departments. Right now, we're doing the first vote on this budget amendment, the final one for FY21. We'll be back on the 26th with the second reading. And then from there, we'll get into the FY22 budget year, of course. So I'm going to build this table out a little bit at a time just because I think that's a little bit easier to track than throwing all the numbers up there at once. So on the left side here, you have your what we adopted with the FY21 amended budget. You can see that we were starting with a $24.5 million fund balances, money in the bank essentially. This is important because this number doesn't usually change very dramatically, but this year it did, right? So we went from a starting fund balance of 24.5 to 29 million. Now, the reason that this happened is basically we had a lot of money come in that we booked into the previous fiscal year, FY20. So there was 5.1 million in CARES money. There was 1.3 million in Harvey FEMA money coming back in. When COVID was hitting the city, we went in and we cut revenue expectations, we cut expenditures. Revenues actually did pretty well overall. In expenditures, we did end up cutting, so really you kind of had a good situation there fund balance wise. And so, at this point, fund balance has increased considerably. We're doing two steps tonight with this budget amendment. The first are operational adjustments, things that staff really feel are critical. It's moving, $10 from this account to $10 over to this account so we can pay for POs and things like that, as well as some larger suggested additional appropriations. You can see here that we're bringing in $1.2 million in increased revenue. We're increasing expenditures on the operational side by $1.3 million, whereas we're also recommending an additional $1.2 million in expenditures for additional appropriations. At the end of the day, what this will do is actually draw down your fund balance from $29 million to a projected $26.9 million. What this translates to is being $15.6 million above your current policy. Current policy is $15.6 million. You'll be $11.3 million above that policy. And if you divide your current expenditures per day, you end up with a 105 days worth of cash on hand, essentially. Our target is 90, so we're well above that at this point. What makes this a little bit weird, right, is that expenditures are outpacing revenues. That's mainly due to the winter storm and as well as our fire department helping deliver vaccines in remote areas. Both the winter storm and that TIFMAS project, which was for the vaccines, will be largely reimbursed through grants in the future. We just can't book that revenue now because we're not sure what fiscal year it's going to come in. So that makes it look like we're spending more, but in the end of the day, we'll have that revenue back in large part. Some key revenues that went up, really sales and use taxes increased the most. They went up by 8%, $1.8 million. Seeing really strong sales taxes with COVID-19 and how that shifted spending patterns, and we've been tracking this every month. Also, the latest stimulus payments from the federal government deeply impacted spending behaviors. You can see that really jump compared to where we were this time last year, where the economy was kind of locked down. You're looking at 30 or 40% increases. That won't last as spending habits revert back to normal and people start going on vacations and things. Transfers increased by $1 million. This is coming from the ARPA pool of money. So this is the new pool of grant money coming from the federal government. This is recognizing lost revenue. Essentially, we can bring it in as cash balance to the general fund. Charges for service increase, business permits saw a revenue increase. That's a huge percentage, but it's because there was a relatively small amount booked there, so it kind of just skews the percent. Your delinquent property taxes increase, and your charges for service, ambulance service cost settlement came in more than we thought it would. So we're adjusting those revenues up. Significant revenues that we're adjusting downward are charges for service memberships, right? Decreasing those down just because a lot of services weren't available. So you saw people not buying things like parks memberships. You also this year, due to market conditions, our investment earnings have decreased significantly compared to what they normally would be. So we're adjusting them down 89%, which is $400,000 essentially. Fines and forfeitures decreased 23%. We're starting to see this tick up, but it's going to kind of be a lagging indicator as things have gotten back to normal. The police have been coming back to normal operations as well, but then that is going to have to matriculate through the court system before you see that revenue start to come in. We're making some small adjustments to current property taxes, but really you get that back on the delinquent property tax side above. And then we had franchise fees, telephones, and some more business permits being adjusted down as well. On the expenses that went up, the salaries and benefits went up 3%. This is a grouping of all of those sort of salary and benefit overtime accounts. This is going to be your largest amount that's moving up. This is because of the winter storm and because of that fire department program that I talked about where they were giving vaccines. There's a lot of overtime involved in those. There's a lot of salaries and things like that involved in those that are sitting in the general fund. And when we know when that money is going to be coming back and how much will be coming back, we'll be sure to report to council. We're also increasing transfers out by $1 million. This is inclusive of the recommendations we're making for an appropriation to pay for repairs to 2 fire stations. So that's what that transfer is. We are increasing the professional and contractual services, accounting services cost 270%, 220 grand for audit services, I believe. And then building and grounds pavement we're bringing that up 96%. That is an increase to bring pavement markings back to where it was. That is included as the additional appropriations that we talked about earlier. And I should say, bringing that back to where it was pre-COVID. That is one of the items we kind of cut to save on expenditures. Expenditures that went down, we saw a lower cost for electricity with our streetlights. So that is being lowered down 23% and provides $470,000 back into the general fund. So we are calling these proposed additional general fund appropriations, which is a mouthful, but really what we mean are these are the things staff feel like really have to get done. They're almost must-dos, but of course we need council approval before we can proceed. So there's 2 fire station repairs that total $912,000. There's the $147,000 in street markings that we talked about. There's the part-time judges for municipal courts, that's $73,000. EMS billing, this is $57,000 because the company that we work with in kind of our call center has changed their billing operations to bill us quarterly instead of annually, and that conveniently sped it up a quarter. So we need to pay them $57,000 for that policy change on their end. We're adding a parks worker that Clay told me I have to say is the budget office's fault that it was cut. I apologize. So that one's on me. We're happy to add it back though. And then we are converting a jail manager to a sworn officer position. Previously, this was a civilian position. Now it is going to be a lieutenant, I believe. Correct. And this will just be sort of a marginal $7,000 this year. We did want to bring forward some additional general fund appropriations that council talked about. These are possibilities. One of the reasons we didn't include them is because they weren't as necessary as like the fire department repairs, for example. You could hold off on them. In the eyes of our credit rating agencies, with the fact that we're spending right now on paper, it looks like we're spending more this year than we're bringing in because we haven't gotten that grant revenue back. It might look better to them if we stick to just the core items, but we certainly have the fund balance to do a little bit more as well. So we wanted to bring back the audio video equipment for the courts. That's a $100,000 upgrade to help them hold trials and things like that and record in a way that meets the state standards. You also have historically underutilized businesses for $45,000. This is a study to help us figure out how to better leverage small businesses essentially in Pearland and what can we do with procurement policies and those sorts of things. And then the shallow draft high water rescue boats, which are $18,000 each. And I believe that includes the training amount as well that we would need for our firefighters to safely use those. Before I go on to the water and sewer fund, any questions on the general fund? Okay.
Eric, sorry.
Yes, sir.
Just to clarify, so how much money do we have, quote unquote, in the bank?
So after today's adjustments, including the recommendations that staff are suggesting, the ones that we really feel have to go and be done, you're looking at having $26.9 million in the bank, in the general fund.
I guess how much is the excess over the budgeted? Because these adjustments that you have total about 1.2 million, which you notated in the memo.
Yeah.
And so I'm just trying to understand, like, what is dollars in the bank that we can have to add items or take away items?
So I would have to run a quick calculation and I can get back to you on what the available is, but essentially if you want, you can take this 105 days down to 90. I wouldn't recommend that with the state of expenditures being higher than revenues, but 90 is our target fund balance and we're above that at this time. 90 days, sorry.
And that equates to $11.3 million. So
yes, sir.
That's what that line is.
Okay, so in theory, on the list of would-be nices, we could, in theory, fund almost all of those based on dollars in the bank. In
Yes.
theory, just, okay. All right.
Yes,
Just want to
and-
clarify that.
And sorry, one correction. This $11 million this is over the stated policy. 90 days is a target. The stated policy is still the 16.67% instead of the 25%.
I was going to mention that, and since we're exceeding that 90-day target, can we go ahead and get that on an agenda to update the policy to hit the 90 days? That way we can stop the footnotes and just say 90 days it is.
Absolutely.
Member Perez, you had a question?
Yeah, a couple of things. One, Fire Station 2 repairs at $450,000. We're still looking at possibly getting some or all of that refunded to us with future action, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. No objection to the others. Just want to maybe clarification on I believe the part-time judges, that is a non-recurring expense, where that's just to deal with the overflow of COVID-related delay. But the other personnel, are those intended to be recurring expenses?
The parks worker will be a continued expense. The jail manager it's not a new FTE, it's just a swap to the civil service side. And that's why a new civil service plan is included as part of this budget amendment.
I think, personally, I'm not a scuttle the boat here, but I think personally, I'm reticent to include recurring expenses in these adjustments because it becomes difficult for us to understand what the baseline budget was in the subsequent year. I think for the future, I would much prefer we don't do that, or if we're adding a recurring expense through a budget amendment that we note on there, this is a recurring expense. So it's not one-time expenditure. We're adding $10,857 for a parks worker to each budget year. So it's a full accounting of what the impact of this is. It'd be my preference to not add that budgetary expense since it's recurring to this budget, but unless there's another council member that wants to move on that, I'll leave it be.
If I could, I understand the principle, and you're absolutely right. The only caveat I'd add is that, as was stated, the parks worker is a little bit of an exception, which just got dropped out of there. It should have been included. And as Eric said, that jail manager is not a FTE add. It's how we have to do this for civil service purposes to recognize. Otherwise, this wouldn't even be here.
No, 100% agree. I don't think anybody's doing anything wrong. I just, as a policy, maybe in the future, just to note, we're adding personnel, what is a recurring and what's non-recurring.
Yes, sir.
Eric, on the memo you had, the 1.9 million, which was the largest cost increase, you notated that with retirements being 640,000 above amended.
Correct.
Can you shed more light on that? Just because it sounds like that probably moved a little bit of what we thought was going to be there and sucked up some capacity.
Yeah, so normally I believe we spend about $200,000 a year out of the general fund when people retire, and we do payouts for their accumulated sick leave and things like that. This year we've had more turnover, and from what we can tell, pretty much every city and many private businesses are seeing kind of this musical chairs in the economy with people changing jobs and things like that. There definitely seems to be a notion that a lot of people carried through their city governments through COVID-19 and then, put in their retirement papers because they were eligible and they feel like they had gotten through it. So for whatever reasons are behind those, we just have a lot more retirements than we normally do. We don't anticipate this being like a permanent increase every year where you're going to see $600,000 in payouts. I think it's kind of a one-time increase.
You don't feel it's a trend?
Yes, sir.
Can we go to the next slide with the additional items that didn't make the initial cut here? I just want to highlight the shallow draft high water rescue boats, and that's something I know the staff kind of laughs about, but I take it kind of seriously. We had 400 high water rescues in Harvey, and we actually didn't have any of our own boats. We had to go break into Academy to go steal them / borrow them. And these storms are getting bigger. And if Hurricane Laura had hit us last year, people would have either left the city or had to probably hunker down. And we want to have more than just what we have now. And I want to read the memo really quickly from Mr. Martin, our emergency coordinator. This is from a memo he wrote on March 23rd of 2020. Quote, the only variable in the amount of rain and resultant water depth. Given the certainty of future flood events and uncertainty surrounding water depth, the city of Pearland must adopt a precautionary approach and acquire the capability to undertake rescue operations in water depths that exceed the capability of ground vehicles. The alternative is to rely on mutual aid, a dubious assumption that flood response capabilities will come from some other source, end quote. That's a really, really kind way of saying we need to augment our capability, and if we don't, good luck. I don't know how to put that more bluntly, but I see these kids here, and I don't want them to be on the good luck boat. I want them to actually be on something that if we ever have to come save them, we have the capabilities. And so I would really ask the council that we suck up this 18,000 and add that this year and go from there. I have 400 high water rescues. Stealing boats from Academy doesn't really work for me. We need to get training on that. And so I would really just ask that we include that. And Mr. Coker, do I need to amend this, or how do we, if we wanted to add that into into the appropriation, how would we do that?
Yes, it would need to be amended to include it in the amendment, into the proposed amendment. Yeah. So, but that would be done. Once, of course, appropriate time is after the council's had the discussion. Yes.
I'd like to make the motion right now to amend to include the shallow draft high water rescue boat appropriation as part of the mid-year appropriation.
I would just request maybe we get to the end of the entire item and see if there's any other amendments that we would like to make. Otherwise, we're going to start and stop on various amendments. But maybe it's worth noting. I'd be in favor of the hub tracking, but I'd be perfectly comfortable if that got punted into the budget item for next year.
I did have a question on this slide. The audio video equipment, Eric, state what that was for again. I'll make sure I heard that correct.
So in the municipal courts, there is audio and video equipment in both of the courtrooms. I believe primarily one of the courtrooms is the one that has fallen behind in terms of just the quality of the equipment. I believe it's not working up well enough to be considered a court of record. So we want to upgrade that equipment so that, things like the video are clear, the audio is clear. We're creating a great record of what happened there and why.
So my question to that would be, do we have cases that are potentially have problems with because of the current, state of affairs with our audio video equipment in that court?
I don't think it's affecting current cases as much as it's affecting the backlog and the speed at which we can address it. I don't think that they're using equipment in a way that would set us up for some future issues.
Okay. Maybe if we could would the council have any objection to us adding all three of the items to the future amendment once we adopt it?
No issue for me.
We don't have any objection. We can just amend the motion to include the additional items.
So you want to include all
How
these?
many shallow
I'm asking if
high water boats does that include?
Asking if you'd have
18,000 is not very much money for boats.
18,000 is one boat.
Okay, well, it's got boats, so it's a little misleading.
Remember, I wanted more, but this was their compromise. I actually wanted 5, and they offered 1, but we will keep adding at this every year until we get a reasonable amount. So I think this is a reasonable compromise. I'm not satisfied, but it's better than nothing.
So before we add these, I think we've got the water sewer fund side. So let's make this in keeping with your comments. Why don't we move on with the water sewer side, the enterprise side, and see if we have additional amendments to this before we, like you said, go back and forth on a bunch of them. Yeah. So Eric, keep going. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Water and sewer fund is the other fund we're going to highlight here today. We're making adjustments in this amendment to numerous funds, but these are the big ones that we're going to talk about. And this one's a little bit simpler and more straightforward. Your beginning cash equivalents, which is beginning fund balance, essentially didn't change. What we are doing is we're increasing the revenue, $1.6 million. We're seeing strong sales in water. It also helps, or I shouldn't say helps, but you're billing for 32 days. You're billing for more days than there are in a year as we play catch up. So you're eating into some of that backlog, and that's part of this 1.6 certainly. So when we project forward on future revenues, we'll be sure not to accidentally include that, kind of one-time transactionary bump. Expenditures are decreasing $5,000. So you can see that the projected ending cash equivalents are 22 million. We had thought we had originally be at 20.5. So some improvements there due to the strong revenue. Our policy is a minimum reserve policy of 25%. That's $16.3 million. We are $5.9 million above that. This bond coverage ratio currently is calculated once per year. It's very technical the way the model calculates it from the bottom up. And so having discovered that, we're going to work on an ability to calculate this throughout the year going forward. I apologize that what we have been doing is just taking the number that we have at the beginning of the year and moving it forward every time we do a budget amendment. In the future, I hope to be able to kind of recalculate that for you on a fly. I didn't know that until we got into this, though. Cash reserve ratio, on the other hand, we can calculate right now, and so that is increasing 2% from 75% to 77%, and your minimum cash reserve ratio is 25%, so we're still looking very healthy there. Looking at some of the revenues, right? Water sales increased 4%, sewer increased 2%. Some late payments increased this year due to probably COVID-19 related, people being behind. So that was $230,000. And then on the revenue side, no major revenues went down more than $100,000. There's some adjustments here and there, but nothing major. On the expenditure side, you'll see some shifting of where we're buying water from. So purchase of water at Alice increased 11%. Salaries and benefits increased 3.6%. Again, that's going to be due to the winter storm for the large part. It affected the general fund, and it also affected our employees in the enterprise fund. The water meter sales increased 80%. This is sort of an item in, item out. So we buy a water meter, we then sell a water meter. It's kind of a net thing. It just happened to pop up because we're taking items over 100,000. And then your transfers out increased a little bit at 133K. On the side of what expenditures went down, utilities went down 6%. Purchases of water at FM 521 went down 11%. Purchase of water American Canal down 21%. Repair and maintenance of water wells were revising downward 27%. And then some contractual services went down, and so that's a decrease of 11%. We are not proposing any additional appropriations at this time for the enterprise fund. So that makes this slide much simpler.
All right, why don't you go back to that original, the slide before that.
This one, Mayor?
Next one. Keep going. All the way back, because I think we're finished with the slides. Go ahead, right there. Keep it there. Any other questions, comments on, I guess, the water and sewer enterprise fund? Looked like a lot of that was what we went up on. We also went down on, so it was almost a wash. I looked at it, pretty close.
I guess one comment. Following along, there's a few differences on the slides that were published online.
Yes, sir.
And these slides specifically are going to get looked at time and time again. So we need to get those updated and try to get that updated prior to meetings, because I'm following along and not seeing the same numbers.
The first numbers and your starting balances and your ending balances, all of those should have stayed the same. There was a difference in one of the net changes. The net calculation was off just due to fat fingers, and I apologize. The rest of the presentation, the only change was being flushed out with additional information on what the additional appropriations being recommended are, what the high-level revenues being are, what those items over $100,000 either way, listing those out. And then what we do with all of our budget items is we post them online at the budget's webpage so that they can find them all kind of in one place and track how the budget changes over time.
Okay, but now we're going to have different versions floating out there that have different numbers.
Yes, sir.
And I guess it's just interesting to note that we've got, what was it, 1.6 million in additional revenue in the water and sewer fund. So I don't know how that'll factor into the 3230 going forward, but it's a good place to start.
All right, any other questions, comments about the presentation? I know we had some discussion about adding the potential additional general fund appropriations here, either one or all of these, that would take an amended motion to what's on the table.
Would everybody be okay with just adding all three, or is there any objection to any of the three?
I'll object to all three.
Duly noted. I'll request an amendment of the motion to add the three items, the potential additional general fund appropriation items to the motion.
We have a motion.
Second.
We have a second. All right. Any other questions or comments about the amendment, adding audio-video equipment, historically underutilized businesses, and shallow draft high water rescue boats?
Just to clarify, my no vote on this is because our expenditures exceed our revenues, and we are bumping up against our target 90 days, as well as facing some credit agency dings to our credit. So with all those and staff being okay punting these, that's my no vote.
I'll agree to the shallow boats, but not the other two.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? We have a motion and a second on the table. Let's vote on that amending motion if it needs.
Can I actually, I do have one question. Could we see again, what was that that number of days of spending we have in reserve?
There.
The general fund?
So 256. So what is the sum of each of these? Sorry, if we were to add each of the three proposed items, what does that get us to? 145 plus the 18. So that's 163. Is that right?
It's 60% of what the overage is, essentially.
163 is correct.
Well, 60% of
265
of one day, not of the whole thing. It's 60% of a single day. So we're not really. We're not like right on the cusp of hitting that 90 days. We've got. Can we go back to the other side? How many days we have? Yeah. So we thought we were going to have 95, which is good because it was over our target of 90. We are up to 105, and we're talking about using 60% of a single day of that overage. I don't think this isn't making a big dent in getting us close to our projected year end. So I feel comfortable. Thank you.
Just to clarify this, so Eric, for the public's knowledge, these are dollars in the bank. This is not credit card dollars. This is dollars sitting in a bank account that the city of Pearland has.
This is a projection of at the end of the fiscal year, money that you'll have in the bank. A lot of cities call it their rainy day fund. And that's why we have 90 days worth of money in our rainy day fund we're looking at being at 105 days instead of 90.
We've had plenty of rainy days and plenty more rainy days to come. So I think this is a prudent and metaphorically appropriate use of those rainy dollars.
And the boats are for the rainy day. So
That's what I was alluding to.
Fair enough. Let's go ahead and just vote on the amendment.
Yeah, that's where I was trying to get to. And I can't see Member Hernandez on my screen, just to make sure if he needed to say something. But I would like to call Thank you. I would like to call for a vote on the amended motion, and that is to add all three of these. So with that, Madam Secretary, let's call for that vote on the amended motion.
Member Perez?
Aye.
Member Owens?
Aye.
Member Orlando?
Aye.
Member Carbone?
No.
Member Kamkar?
Aye.
Member Hernandez?
Aye.
Member Little? The motion carries 5-2.
So with that, we have an amended motion on the table. So now we need to vote on that, the overall motion with the amended motion being on the table. So,
Mayor, we're looking at, on the note on this a while ago, is these numbers are, I guess what Tony was talking about, these numbers are actually for May.
from what?
For May. These are not numbers that I see on the screen here for in the July time figures in May, at the end of May.
Eric, is this through the end of May?
All of which numbers in particular?
Well, if you go to the bottom of the screen, there it's a close of month of May. That's what it's, please note the revenues and expenditures as for the memo is estimated for the close or last part of May. So these are not today's numbers.
I'll have to
Too
double
much
check.
out.
I believe they are today's numbers. Let me double check why the footnote says May, but I can't see why we wouldn't include the latest information.
Well, I can't see why we.
Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. They are May because June hasn't closed yet.
We wouldn't have the sales tax numbers from June, correct?
Correct.
Wait a second. When you say the revenues and expenditures, the annual revenues and expenditures, they're not, none of this is through May.
I was just reading the notes on
I
the bottom.
understand,
That's
but
what it
yeah,
says.
I think there were there's references in the memo to where things are currently at versus, like, hey, as of today, it was $1.8 million, and that's what we're trying to tie to.
Yeah, all the revenues and expenditures are projections through the end of the year, fiscal year.
Yes, sir.
And we used through May numbers to extrapolate from there based on. So that's what that reference to me. It's not clear. Apologize. You're right, but that's revenues and expenditures on the far right, and everywhere else are annual numbers.
Yeah, May was the end of the quarter, correct?
June was, but
June was the end of the quarter.
And Eric,
We don't have sales. I'm sorry, we don't have sales tax numbers yet because you're.
Right.
That's what I meant. You're 2 months. Yeah, 2 months behind on that.
and Eric, just so you know, there was a white paper in February having these items that we expected a certain amount of balance. Is that correct or incorrect?
Yes, we were recommending items given a certain amount of balance. Since then, that picture has changed pretty considerably because of the starting balance to FY20 changing, like we discussed.
And the winter storm and, right, okay. I just, for the public's benefit, we're not talking drastic changes here. We expected some level of additional surplus funds.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Well, we have an approved amended motion on the table, so I don't see anybody else moving forward. So, Madam Secretary, we'll call for the vote.
Member Perez?
Aye.
Member Owens?
No.
Member Orlando?
Aye.
Member Carbone?
No.
Member Camcar?
Aye.
Member Hernandez?
Aye.
Member Little?
No.
The motion carries 4-3 to approve ordinance number 1595-2 as amended.
All right, moving forward in our agenda, Member Carbone, would you place number 6 on the table, please?
Thank you, Mayor. Consideration and possible action, Resolution R 2021-138. So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Staff report.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Pleased to bring this forward to you. This is a contract for getting our existing streets and sidewalks maintenance program energized. Put this out and have competitive proposal bids. Greenscape was the low responsive bidder. So this amount will get us through the next 12 months, bleeds into next year, but this represents our about, I think it was 500,000 into sidewalks and 2 into streets, concrete, I believe, over the next 12 months. Nothing to add.
All right, concludes the staff report. So, and for council questions, comments? Seeing none, Madam Secretary, call for the vote.
Member Carbone?
Aye.
Member Camcar?
Aye.
Member Hernandez?
Aye.
Member Little?
Aye.
Member Perez?
Aye.
Member Owens?
Aye.
Member Orlando?
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0 to adopt resolution number R 2021-138.
All right. Member Camcar, place number 7 on the table, please.
Yes, Mayor. Consideration possible action, first reading ordinance number 1602. So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Staff report.
Thanks, sir. This has been this is our first reading of a new ordinance to us, but something that's been adopted in multiple cities across the state and country. And it's basically to square up the how short-term rentals of individual homes are treated in terms of registering and paying hotel motel tax versus our traditional hotel sector. And so there's companies out here that can help us administer that. But this is a first step in terms of requiring that registration and getting our arms around where these are located, the volume and so forth. There's not any performance per se at this stage, but there's been extensive work with our Convention and Visitors Bureau. They've been in consultation with industry representatives, various firms, and sample ordinances. And then, of course, our legal department, and ready to bring this forward to you for consideration. I don't know if Tracy has anything to add from that. She's here as well.
I believe we also had a couple of folks speaking on behalf. I don't know when the appropriate time is for that.
That's where I was headed next. We do have two members of the public that would like to speak to this. I believe they're both online. First is Tony Caro.
Good evening.
There we go.
Good evening, Mayor Cole and Honorable City Council. I am Antonio Caro. I am the GM of the Hilton Garden in Pearland, and I'm here representing the Pearland CVB board, as well as many of the other hotels in Pearland, along with Manny Patel. The reason we're presenting today is in an effort to request your support of an amendment to Chapter 20 of the Code of Ordinances to level out the playing field with some of the Airbnbs and short-term rentals that are currently operating within Pearland that are not paying taxes as we are. So we're losing out as a city on a city tax revenue base. And we just want to be treated, we want you to treat these short-term rentals in the same manner in which we have to adhere to the regulation structures for our hotel. I can honestly tell you as a hotel professional for the last 30 years, it was a tough year, 2020, for all of us. And in many cases, when we were close to closing our hotel, there was Airbnbs and Verbos and Flip Keys operating all over these country, not to mention Pearland, and making revenues while not paying taxes. So I can also tell you that it would certainly help keep the criminal or unfavorable element out of Pearland, because sometimes the people that rent the short-term rentals are not necessarily the people that are citizens of the city of Pearland. So we would request the support of City Council in creating the requirements for registration programs and operations of short-term rentals, and the requirements to pay hotel occupancy fees to the city of Pearland. And I want to thank you for your time this evening, and I look forward to your decisions. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Caro. Also, I believe online is Mr. Manny Patel. State your name and address for the record, please.
No, hello.
There we go.
All right, sorry guys. I'm Manny Patel. I represent the Comfort Suites and the Sleep Inn and Suites hotels in Pearland, and I live on Don Drive. I'm also a member on the CVB board, advisory board. So, going back to trying to touch base what Tony was talking about, I've spoken with quite a few hotels in the area as well, and we're going back to the same situation, trying to level out the playing field. VRBO, Airbnbs, there's no real regulations that the city imposes on them, where as a hotelier we have different rules, regulations, just basic safety needs that have to be met for everyone that comes to our doors, and Airbnb, VRBO, they don't have those. We're losing city hot taxes. That's one option. And then also just by registering the locations of where they operate out of, those are potential permit fees that we can be making extra money for the city, and let alone to be made aware that, hey, there's a Airbnb in the area that's out for rent. And most of these subdivisions or whatnot have rules and regulations. The HOA, they allow it, some don't allow it, but they're still out there. But that's why once, if an ordinance is changed on this chapter 20, I think that would benefit everyone in the long run. And I know that it's going to be a little bit, it's not going to happen overnight, but it's still a step in the right direction. Several other cities in the area, even our surrounding area, have started this, and they've been collecting hotel occupancy taxes, and it's benefited them in the long run. So thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. Thank you for both joining our meeting online as well. So I guess with that, I have a couple of questions. I guess one, assuming this gets approved, obviously we have a first reading and then a second reading, this gets approved, how do we go about implementing it? I mean, do we even know, I mean, I know we know a few problem childs that are out there in the Airbnb world, but beyond that, how do we identify and find them and then notify them?
So there's actually pretty slick services that take care of this, and it's very reasonable, and that's built into assumed in the program. And maybe Tracy can talk a little about how you vetted that and discovered that, and what the plan would be after this if it's passed.
So there are vendor partners available in the industry that have expertise in this area. And so the process would be to rely on this vendor partner to help us identify the properties. That's usually the challenge for most cities and destinations, is finding out where these properties are located. So one leading vendor in the tourism space stands apart in that they have a 90% compliance rating in year one. So with their platform and their experience doing this and launching it in Colorado over a decade ago, they can help us identify the properties, which is the first step in this, one of many steps, I should say, in this process that we're headed down.
I guess it's important to note, Mayor, we've learned through this, but we're not breaking any new ground with that. As she said, there's people that have the tools and the search engines and so forth to beat the bushes and get that out. Now, it's really like what is anticipated for the first year, at least, is to get our arms around what the scope is, and then we can share that, and then we'll all be able to make better decisions from there.
So presumably, we would use the hot tax to pay for the consultant, and then they would be essentially compensated for the additional hot tax that we're able to capture by their effort.
Correct.
Okay.
What's the registration fee for these small operators, or whatever we're calling them here?
In this initial phase rollout, we're recommending a grace period of not offering a registration fee, just as we launch out of the gate. And then in year two, we can look at what the appropriate fee should be for registration. It varies from market to market.
What's the penalty, Darren, for a violator of the city ordinance? Is it a Class C misdemeanor?
Yes, it's a Class C misdemeanor. It references in here Section 111 of the City Code of Ordinance, so it's going to fall back to that, which is under Class C. And Lawrence, correct me if I'm wrong, but is it the maximum fine for that $500?
Yes, sir. It's $500. So it would depend on what the judge or the jury determined, but it would be an amount between $100 and $500 if the person is found guilty of not registering.
All right, thank you.
And if you don't pay that, what happens?
You don't pay the fee.
You don't pay the fine.
So if you are fined and then you don't pay it, it would go into warrant. If it goes into warrant, it subjects the person to being arrested the same way they would if they didn't pay a speeding ticket. Or in addition to that, if the person has any type of corporation status, we also would notify the Attorney General, and they would revoke, or they have the ability to revoke any licenses that the person may have. So, well, there's just traditional penalties that can, civil remedies, I would describe it as, that you can apply if it's a business who fails to pay the fines.
And just to clarify, that's after a person would have already received a warning that you're not in compliance, you need to come in and register. there's no cost, and if they choose not to register, but then, so that one, they would not have been collecting the sales taxes they're required to remit to the city, and then, of course, they could be subject to that criminal violation in municipal court.
Sure. So I guess that's just the gravity of, I mean, we're kind of talking about the ultimate thing. I mean, at the end of the day, and there's plenty of steps in between, right? And you have due process and whatever, but we're talking about creating a new offense that eventually, if someone breaks it and does not comply with this offense, they could be subject to literal imprisonment. So I guess I just kind of want to understand better, knowing that we're considering something tonight that has that eventual repercussion. I kind of want to a little bit better understand the mechanics of this. So first of all, I guess, would a B&B operator be required to, they're calculating what the hot tax would be on their stay individually, and then it's their obligation to write a check, I guess, quarterly or annually to the city, or how does that work?
I'll defer that question to Tracy if you want to go ahead and take that.
Sure. So we would rely on the Airbnb host to report their revenue and the amount that they need to remit. Currently, our hotels remit payment on a quarterly basis. So we would probably mirror that process for the short-term rental.
I guess, what's our ability to figure out how much they're actually getting in terms of payments and to validate that they're remitting the correct amount?
So there are a couple of software platforms that are available to help us calibrate that. So in addition to the vendor partner, there is another subscription service where we can monitor activity.
Yeah.
So we'd be able to calibrate between the two sources,
right,
to some degree to qualify.
Right. I guess my thought there is it just might be a little tough. I just stayed in 4 or 5 Airbnbs, and it seems like it's sometimes the pricing is kind of opaque. And even if you know what the room night rate is, there's all these other ancillary fees, and that's kind of a running joke that, like, oh, Airbnb is so cheap, and then you go to check out for your $100 room and it's $250 for that night. So I guess I just kind of have I feel like that might be more complicated in this instance than maybe it is for a hotel, where it's a little more straightforward for us, making sure that we're requiring the correct amount be remitted back.
Member Orlando, I have so many questions about how you monitor this. I mean, do we have to hire a new employee just to go chase down short-term rentals?
No, we would be partnering with the vendor who specializes.
No, I'm just saying, like, at what point does that line get crossed? Because I appreciate that a business owner in Pearland is worried about the tax base of the city when we know business owners want to minimize their taxes. And so I appreciate the reasoning. I think it's funny, but the reality is do we really want to be in the chase you down game? Like, I think there's a better way to go about regulating this than going out there and trying to chase people on hot tax.
Yeah, the thing about it too,
I'm sorry, council. I just want to make sure everybody on the council understands the individuals who are doing this now have been violating a different ordinance for all these years. Yeah. They are currently subject to the hotel motel tax.
Sure. And they're
even an Airbnb is. So I just want to make sure everybody understands this is not a new regulation. It's just one that we're seeking to actually.
This would be like a resident next to your house as B&B, and like they do in Green Tea, they party all night.
Oh yeah,
no, are covered with people.
I agree with you, Woody, but getting them to pay taxes doesn't defer them from going and throwing the party.
Right. And what I would say there too is those folks are violating an ordinance, and it's been addressed. I think my parents live in Green Tea, not far away from where that's going down, and I understand that there are people in the audience who've been dealing with that for a long time. I think there are means for addressing this. I just want to make sure when we're using, we talk a lot about who's big government, who's small government up here, using the power of the state to fine and arrest people is literally as big government and as intrusive as it gets. So I want to make sure if we're going to be using that power, we are being very deliberate and very thoughtful about making sure we're dotting all of our I's and crossing our T's.
I think we're talking about several of the things, and we're circling the drain. But people who violate the intent of the short night rental as violating one ordinance, creating a competitive balance for our business partners so that the hotels within our town who provide hot tax to us so that we can attract people, we can spend that money to attract people to the town we want to create a competitive balance for them. I think that's the intent. We have 182 employees that its sole purpose is to go down and chase people to ensure that they're adhering to the rules and not violating the law.
We're hiring a consultant to go chase these people. That's not any better.
It's being paid for by the fee that we're collecting.
So why don't we think out of the box for a second? Let's just put the box over here. Why don't we regulate out the short-term rental for a day to a week or 2 weeks, and that way the system works itself out, as opposed to us hiring somebody to go chase down somebody for $60 or $20. Like, why don't we just move that change? Because
explain what you mean. I didn't understand.
Okay, so we want to go throw a rager in green tea, and we want to go do it for 2 days. If the ordinance becomes that a short-term rental could be no less than 2 weeks, we're not going to go and rent for the other 12 days because we're not doing a 2-week rager. We're doing a 2-day rager. And so instead of us hiring a consultant to go chase down for 2 days of hot tax, why don't we just look at how we're calling a short-term rental and redefining the definition of short-term rental?
I don't think it solves anything because we end up still with the issues of enforcement.
But we're probably going from this many quantity of rentals down to
I think
fraction.
The concern, at least when it was brought to me, and the concern that I express is people are coming to town and renting a place temporarily and not paying into a hot tax when other people who come into town and rent a place temporarily do have to pay into a hot tax. And I think we're not really solving the rager issue with this. We're creating competitive balance.
We're just taxing them. We're just taxing them and then letting them still throw the rager. I'm saying let's preclude the rager.
Let me finish what I'm saying. It's the issues associated with people violating noise ordinance and going out in subdivisions and creating commercial business. That's something completely different. The ragers are going to get enforced, to use your term, are going to get enforced separately. Taxing them doesn't resolve this. What we're trying to do here is create a competitive balance between our hotel partners and those who would compete against them and have a competitive
So if you're going to rent, let's just go down, let's put this box over here for a second. If we're going to say that a short-term rental cannot be less than 14 days, then guess what happens? You can't rent an Airbnb for 2 days, and so guess what? The businesses existing get the hotel use, and we get the hot tax, and we don't have to go hire a consultant to chase down people throwing a rager. That seems very business-oriented way to solution this, as opposed to let's just hire a consultant to chase down for 2 days of taxes.
Well, you just create two different rules. You're talking about creating two different rules that have to be enforced one way or the other.
So real quick, Mr. Coker, on the definition of short-term rental that's in here, is the 30 days an arbitrary number? Is that something the state sets out as what's classified as a short-term rental? It's always been my understanding from conversations on these that the regulations of a short-term rental, Airbnb and those types of things are very difficult in the state of Texas. Help understand what Mr. Kamkar is talking about. Is that doable?
Yeah. Well, first of all, that the 30 days is not a statutory number. No. That being said, that is a customary number used by for the definition of a short-term rental, because you have to figure out a differentiation between that and what would be considered a traditional rental, a longer term, a month or more. That being said, the state of Texas, traditionally courts are ruling in favor of the property owner that wants to run the business to be able to run that business. And so then and that's been going on for some time. And in fact, the state attorney general has stepped in and filed amicus briefs in those cases to also support the property owners and their right to be able to do so. And so it's right now cities that are trying to overly regulate, are being basically receiving pushback from the state of Texas, the AG's office, and the courts. That being said, the council needs to, I think the determination was we wanted to capture that revenue because it's a revenue that hasn't been captured in the past, although the ordinance does apply to them. And I say the ordinance, that's the hotel motel tax ordinance. It applies to single family residences that are rented out for short term. Now, also want to clarify something that's been said as far as the, going out and arresting people. every single ordinance we have in our city code of ordinances has that ability, because if a person is cited and then they come to court and then they are cited and then they don't pay their fine or whatever, or they don't show up here in court, they can get arrested for that. And that would be for just about any violation in our city code of ordinances. It's not unique to this. It's whether or not you come in and you show up and you take care of business. If you ignore that business, you're going to run the risk of getting arrested for
be it a traffic ticket, be it a parking ticket, be it a high weed.
Failing to register under one of our other ordinances. There's going to be a penalty provision for failing to comply.
Penalty if you don't register your pets.
Correct.
Well, not anymore, but
I mean, used to.
Right. It has been traditional.
And Mr. Coker, the pushback from the state associated with this has been cities who wish to attempt to create a prohibition against short-term rentals, not those who wish to collect.
Variety.
Tax, correct.
No, you're correct. That's one version. Many cities have come in and tried to ban the ability to have short-term rentals. Others have come in and tried to have other regulatory provisions. We're not going to ban them, but we're going to come in and use other regulatory measures to regulate. And the courts have stepped in and sometimes said, nope, you're overstepping your bounds there. This ordinance doesn't do that. This ordinance just simply says, we're going to make you pay the tax. That I guess the question would be, is if you're going to not provide here, then we would also need to go in and amend our hotel motel occupancy tax, where it also applies to these individuals. We just haven't been enforcing it.
I guess my comment is, I think there's a better way to solve the problem. Let's just redefine that we cannot do a short-term rental less than 14 days, or you have to go to the hotel and let them be the vendor. The Rager isn't going away to a certain extent, but there's a way for us to curtail it, and it's to redefine it.
I think it speaks to what Mr. Coker said. That's creating a prohibition against them, and that's what the state has.
No, not creating we want to make it. We want to change the rules of what that is. I'm not saying you can't do it. Prohibition says you can't do it. I want to say we're defining the definition differently.
We actually have other tools to be able to address that situation. Again, the question here, I think in this ordinance, this ordinance is not a conduct ordinance. This is a monetary ordinance. Are we going to have people be subject to the tax? If we want to go down a different path, this is probably going to be a future discussion. And
if I may, this is an identification ordinance. We're just trying to identify who the short-term rentals are. That's it. Our taxation ordinance in Chapter 29 of the Code of Ordinances is what addresses the payment of taxes or the hot fees. All we're trying to do is identify or force the short-term rental properties to identify. If you wanted to change the definition of a short-term rental, that's something that we could consider. But if somebody chose to do that short-term rental for a shorter period of or duration of what you change it to, we would still need to identify who is doing those short-term rentals for 2 days versus 2 weeks. It's the identification process that we're after. The identification will let us address behavioral issues potentially, because now we'll know which properties are actually short-term rentals. Some of these have multiple postings on multiple avenues. We don't know the extent of the problem. The only way that you can start is by identifying who's your short-term rental.
Which is
from there
how?
we can make amendment.
Most of them on a short-term rental, or any of them on a rental, they're not owners of the property within the city of what they are. They buy the homes and they do for the rental. The other side of the coin is too, if you got a residential back here and it's zoned residential, and you put a B&B in there, that's commercial. So why do you got zoning? Why do you have the zoning?
Here's the thing.
It's a waste of time.
Councilman Owens is correct. I don't want to live next to a business. I think that's completely fair. Now, there are different situations. If you're undergoing long-term cancer treatment and you can't afford being in a hotel for 4 months, and it's cheaper to be in an Airbnb 15 minutes away, I am sympathetic to that. That is a real need in the community. That is different. I have such a visceral reaction to let's hire a consultant to go chase somebody throwing a 2-day party. It just feels like fascist, to be honest with you.
I think we're kind of going in circles, so I just want to clarify one thing, and then I'll kind of leave my remarks where they are, and we can move forward. I just want to understand the mechanics of this. So we're talking about this as an identification thing. So just clarify to me, so we're going to hire this consultant. This consultant is going to go and scan VRBO and Airbnb and these other various platforms, and they're going to report what are the existing rentals in Pearland. And then I guess probably periodically they're going to tell us, hey, there's this new Airbnb that popped up, and we're going to confirm as a city, have they or have they not registered under our new requirement? That would seem to be kind of mechanically how this would go, right?
So if I could, forgive me, but this isn't that complicated. We're not hiring a consultant. There's a software package. There's the firm that if somebody elects to rent out their house,
sure,
that they've taken the energy.
My beef's not with the money or the hiring, but understood.
Yeah, but they've registered on Airbnb or whatever, so they've gone through that process and all that. And so the software packages scans exactly like.
But it's a regime to surveil what people to surveil, like if you're doing a B&B or not.
Yeah,
I don't really care that the paying the consultant or not. I care that it just feels like, yeah, you're going to go and pay, or we're going to contract with this entity to go and surveil a private use that people are doing with their homes, and then report that back to us, and we're going to go and see if you're in compliance or not. And if you're not, we're going to fine you. And if you don't want to play along with that, we're going to arrest you.
You remember Orlando?
Which is the case, of course, with any ordinance, but I think we should be thoughtful with any ordinance. And so where I just want to leave this member Kamkar is I completely, I've seen the issues with this. And I think when you have an issue like we've had in Green Tea, I think we should throw the book at these guys as hard as we can. I think that kind of stuff is unacceptable. That the stories that we heard up here are completely unacceptable, and they are violating ordinances. And there's probably some more stuff that we can do in order to have a tighter look at those. I think this takes us into this whole other territory of actively surveilling what people are doing. We're talking about COVID. We're talking about how hard times are economically. We don't want to charge people a $5 drainage fee, but people are struggling to make ends meet. And this is a means that a lot of people have used completely not disruptively to their neighbors and have done it the right way, to make a few extra bucks to rent out a mother-in-law suite above their garage, or to rent out a spare room. And they're doing it the right way. Again, when they're doing it the wrong way, you have no qualms from me about completely throwing the book at those people and getting them offline, honestly. But to go and do this, I think is kind of using like we've said, this isn't even necessarily addressing that issue. I think this is kind of using a sledgehammer where we need a scalpel to go in and fix this problem. So I agree we need to continue to look at the B&B issue. I appreciate the work that's been done here. I'm not comfortable today using this tool to address this specific issue. So I think we can bring this to a close, but I'm concerned that this is doing a lot more than I'm comfortable with to go in and solve some of these trouble spots that absolutely do need to be solved and addressed.
Member Orlando, I agree with you 110%. I'm uncomfortable voting on this today. I don't think this accomplishes it. For the people who are watching at home, if you're a hotel owner, you should really want to redefine what short-term rental is. So that way you're getting pushed, the people less than 2 weeks, into you. Us going and just taxing these people and tracking them down for 2 days of taxes is not going to eliminate really the problem here. We're just going to go chase down 2 days of taxes, and that seems unreasonable.
Yeah, but you're not
think we're ready to
controlling
vote.
it. You know, in our spot down there was over 50 cars that was blocking driveways of other residents there. Music during the night. Matter of fact, they were filming videos, and there's, I think, the guys from California, whatever.
Buddy, let me stop real quick. We have everything confused. There are multiple issues being talked about on the table. The only thing that's being addressed in this particular ordinance request is to make sure that anyone who is operating a short-term rental is operating according to the current ordinance and law, which is our hotel motel ordinance. They are stated in there. I heard people are doing it the right way, except they're not paying their taxes. And I hear that. They're not having parties, they're not having wild, crazy stuff, they're renting out a room, but they're not paying their taxes, which is a current ordinance. We're not creating a new ordinance for that. It's already in the ordinance. This is assessing and trying to figure out how we go and collect that. That's all this is. this does not address necessarily the bad behavior. It's two separate issues, and we've got them all wrapped up into one.
Yeah.
And we're confusing the issue. Okay.
I think on part of that too, the other part is the tax.
Real quick, and we heard Mr. Caro and Mr. Patel, who run hotels, ask, make sure that it's an even playing field. That's all they've asked for. All they're asking for is anyone who pays a short term, whether it's 2 days or 2 million days, that they pay the same tax and the same freight that somebody that has a brick and mortar is paying. That's all they're asking for. And I have to follow rules and regulations in my business. And the last thing that I want is to go and do and play by the rules, and then the next guy gets to come in and doesn't play by the rules. That is not fair. It's not right.
Somewhat, but what I'd say is
somewhat. No, it is not fair.
Well, we're in the position. This is a fight that's happened over and over. This is a fight that's happened over and over. This is the fight of there are these innovative companies that are coming up, whether that's Uber, whether that's Airbnb, that are disruptive to the current set of rules. And fundamentally, people like that. It's providing people better values. It's not constricting people into these hegemonies that have been constructed by certain existing incumbent industries, and it's providing consumers with greater choices, and it's disruptive, and so I was in Austin, and there was this overreach by the liberal city council in Austin that, hey, we're going to go and impose all these requirements on Uber because Big Cab doesn't want Uber to come in and do this. And it was a really crappy thing, honestly, where the last several months of college, we were unable to get a ride to go places because they went and imposed all these things. So ostensibly, so there was fair competition between Uber and the cab. So I understand that argument, but fundamentally it's, are you for the innovative, are we going to encourage or are we going to discourage what the free market is bringing forward in terms of new disruptive options? And so I understand all that. I guess I would quibble a little bit that it's a directly comparable service, renting a mother-in-law suite out for a weekend versus what a hotel is. I understand those concerns. But what I'm saying is this is a fight that's ongoing. And yeah, like people are going to try to quash the new thing that's coming in and providing consumers with more choice. I'm not trying to. And so that's where I kind of come in. I don't want to go in and make it super tough on people. That's all it is.
I'm not saying somebody shouldn't do a short-term rental and rent out their garage apartment to anybody. I'm not trying to quash that at all.
I mean, why are we going to charge them a registration fee? I mean, let's just send them a bill for what they owe.
And get more data.
I just like to call the question.
There's not a registration fee.
Let's call the question.
This year, we'll put one forward for next year, right? Yeah. I mean, it's not this year.
Can we make a motion to table so we can get more data? I'd like to know what the other states are doing, other cities are doing in the state.
We have a motion to, I guess, postpone.
Can we get a motion to postpone?
I hear no second. So with that, I'm going to call for the question.
We got a second.
I was in the middle of talking. I'm going to call for the question and the vote.
Can we make a motion to postpone?
I'll second that.
All right. We have a motion and a second to postpone this vote. Madam Secretary will call for the vote.
Member Kamkar?
Aye.
Member Hernandez is gone. Member Little? No. Member Perez?
No.
Member Owens?
Aye.
Member Orlando?
Aye.
Member Carbone?
No.
The motion, there's a tie, 3-3.
And the motion would fail because the motion to postpone, the motion was to postpone. I'm sorry, and what was the vote?
3-3.
3-3. I guess the mayor will need to cast a vote.
And I vote no.
So the motion fails 4-3.
And so now we're voting on the motion as presented, ordinance number 1602. Madam Secretary, call for the vote.
Member Kamkar?
Abstain.
Member Little?
No. I mean, aye.
Member Perez?
Aye.
I'm sorry, the tapping is being picked up on the recording.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Member Perez?
Aye.
Member Owens?
No.
Member Orlando?
No.
Member Carbone?
Aye.
The motion carries 3-2.
That's correct.
guess I just wonder, why would you even get zoning if you're gonna let a commercial come in next door in the zoning area of residential?
Let's go ahead and move on to item number 8. I'm not sure where we finished off. Mr. Little, would you place number 8 on the table, please?
Thank you, Mayor. Consideration of possible action, resolution number R 2021-150. So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Staff report.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is an item for a construction award on our existing Halleck Drive, just west of State Highway 35 Main Street. And Mr. Buchanan has a brief presentation just to remind you about this project.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Tonight we have before you our State Highway 35, one of the projects of our State Highway 35 redevelopment strategy. This was a strategy that we adopted back in 2016, and the visions to create a high quality and consistently designed employment and business environment with compatible land uses and supportive amenities in the State Highway 35 corridor. Business Park North is in this area that this project relates to, and is part of our Pearland Prosperity Plan for site development. This is the third and final phase of this project. We did a public-private partnership with Presidio Equities to begin redeveloping this area about 4 years ago. Did a PER that designed 3 phases of infrastructure improvements to the area. The first phase was the detention pond and the lateral back to Rice Dryer. Phase 2 was Rice Dryer that we completed in 2020. And tonight what we have before you is phase 3, which will be the reconstruction of Halleck and the associated outfall to the detention facility. Just a reminder of some of the businesses. We have the Pearland Settler Cemetery on the street, and Trigon. We have the business park that has many businesses in it. Besser Plumbing's the newest business on the street. They're just completing their construction. We have a few vacant lots on the street, and then the Holiday Inn is one of the larger users that accesses the street. Just as a reminder, just on Halleck alone, businesses fronting Halleck have about almost $21 million in taxable assessed value. You can see the largest taxpayer is that business park at about $8.2 million. And just right now, the condition of Halleck, this is a picture looking east towards State Highway 35. It's a narrow 2-lane rural cross section. Obviously, it's been asphalt overlaid many times, open ditch, poor sub base. The area's obviously transitioned from a rural area with gravel roads to a more commercial light industrial. So tonight's improvements that we have before you would be very similar to what you approved for Rice Dryer, a 38-foot wide concrete road, storm sewers, a shared detention facility that we've already developed for this project, water line and sanitary line replacements and rerouting of those, a sidewalk, and this is going to be our third phase, which is going to be around approximately $3.6 million in total, and these $3.6 million improvements will serve about 58 acres. So tonight we're here recommending T&amp Services to do the work for a little over $1.6 million. Happy to answer any questions.
All right, that completes staff report. So into questions and comments from council.
Mayor, I'll just reiterate what I stated when we went to design. I believe that the road needs to be redone, but I see this as a capital project, not an EDC project. I see no ability for us to get a return on this investment, which is the primary purpose of the EDC funds. So I'll vote no against it because I believe that the Economic Development Corporation could use $1.6 million in other places that would generate a return, and I think this project should be put on our capital improvements program and eventually be redone there. So that's why I'll vote no.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, Madam Secretary, call for the vote.
Member Little? Aye. Member Perez?
No.
Member Owens?
Aye.
Member Orlando?
Aye.
Member Carbone?
Aye.
Member Kamkar?
Aye.
The motion carries 5-1.
All right, moving forward, matters to be removed from the consent agenda. We've already done that. Other business, there is none, so we're into mayor council issues for city council discussion. We have one item, council input and discussion, engineering design criteria manual, discussion on detention requirements for disturbed area and impervious cover. So with that, do we have a staff report, or do we want to, okay, kick it to Member Perez, I believe he brought this item forward.
Yes, sir, Mayor, and I'll try and keep this as brief as I can. Over the last probably year or so, I've been in constant conversation with staff, intermittently, I guess is probably a better way to say it, trying to get some better consistency and some changes to the engineering design criteria manual. For the most part, staff and I have agreed on some fundamental changes that they think we can restructure how some portions of the EDCM are written so that there's better clarity, but we disagree on something specific. And I think in order to be able to give clear direction on how to move forward, council needs to be involved. Fundamentally, when we run hydraulic calculations, there are some assumptions that are to be made. It's a matter of, do we generally go to assumptions that would generate a higher volume of detention that may not necessarily be justifiable hydraulically and end up taking more land from individual landowners, or do we allow the ponds to be as conservatively large as possible? My request of staff and where we disagree is I want our criteria to change to where we take our base rate, which is 0.65 acre-feet per acre of developed area, and change that to increased impervious cover. The reason for that is I think increased impervious cover is a better representation of the actual impacts. I think that the definition of developed area, though it is a definition in there, there's a lot of subjectivity there, and grading and amending a site does not necessarily adversely affect the hydraulics. So I would be opposed to continuing to enforce this as developed area, go to increased impervious cover. I would also not be in favor of us doing that rate at total land, because that becomes a disproportionate measure to the impacts of a development. So ultimately, what I'm trying to do is see if we can come up with what I would say is a more appropriate detention rate that better registers the impact of the property by measuring how much grass is now pavement, and get to a detention pond that I think is, in my opinion, more appropriate to the size of the development, and not take land from a developer or from a landowner unnecessarily. I would say that, again, not to belabor the point, but when we get too conservative with these detention volumes, it does render some of the smaller tracts, which is most of the tracts we have, it makes them very difficult to develop, if not undevelopable altogether, particularly for the 1 acre tracts and 1 to 2 acre tracts. I'd invite any response from council.
Okay. Member Carbone, I know you seconded this. Did you have any comments along those same lines, or?
No, I think Councilman Perez summarized it well. I guess I'd like to hear other council's comments as well as staff, and try to get this put to bed one way or the other.
All right. I guess, is there a staff report along these lines?
So we provided, Member Perez said that we've been, appreciate his input and clarifications, and we strive for the same thing in terms of consistency and clarity, but did come down to some areas that we could not see ourselves to recommend completely. And Robert's in a much, much better position to explain the technicalities of that. But I don't know if Robert, you want to give an overview about where those areas of professional disagreement are?
Can I maybe just start with what's in the packet, and then I'll toss it off to Robert for any specifics. But the second chart that's in the agenda request is kind of the heart of the matter. We appreciate, looking for clarity, looking for ease of making sure it's communicated what the criteria is to developers.
Trent, real quick, are you talking about the current minimum detention rates?
So it's the chart below the current minimum detention rate. So it's the second chart there. And what that is, that's just some examples of some actual developments within the city of Pearland, the total acreage of those developments. These all did full drainage studies, and the amount of detention they provided based on that study, the minimum that would have been provided based on our current criteria, several other entities' criteria, and then the proposed criteria that we were looking at over on the right-hand side. Our understanding of that is as to how much detention would have been required for those with this proposed minimum criteria on those size of developments. And Robert, any other specifics that are impacting or
Thank you, Mr. Epperson. No, with regards to continuing that discussion on the table that's presented before you, staff took each of those and took a look through based on the criteria from each of the other entities that share our borders. Also, with regards to BDD4, as they mirror our criteria, but then also taking a look at taking each of those plats and then diving down to talk about what Councilman Perez has stated on increased impervious cover, which would be roads and sidewalks, and then taking the consideration as forth with regards to about 7,500 square feet of land associated to each lot. And that's what we used to develop the proposed criteria, just to give some examples and comparison between what is in our current criteria and the methodology followed there. And then also, as you can tell from about the fifth column from the left, is what each of the drainage studies done by the developer for medium and large residential, because that is where we are having that discussion with the difference on impervious cover.
I would just note to maybe complement what Robert said. He and I have discussed these numbers ad nauseum, and probably 2 or 3 meetings, hour, 2 hours long. Not to go into the details, but we just fundamentally disagree on how these numbers are correlated, what these actually represent, how they're generated, and that's where I would like to get to some feedback from council to where if we get to the impervious cover as the metric for which we set a baseline of detention at the rate that we currently require, which is 0.65, I believe that would be more representative of what I've heard from council as finding ways to give developers more predictability early on, finding ways for us to create criteria that's much more justifiable to what the impacts that we're trying to have. So there's a lot in these numbers that could be stated or overstated, and I mean, Robert we could just talk for hours and bore the hell out of you about what we agree and don't agree with. But that's fundamentally that's what the difference is.
So I guess a question I've got just to help, and I don't have a vote on it, but increased impervious cover. So what, do you have something you would propose that's different than this that, I mean, is in writing?
Yeah, so in our current criteria, we have for the low-level developments or the smaller developments, 1 acre or less, we have a criteria that says it's 0.65 acre-feet per acre for increased impervious cover. When you get to 2 to 200, no, it's 1 to 2, and then 2 to 200 is how we have that broken down. 1 to 2, it becomes 0.65 acre-feet per acre of developed area, and 2 to 200, it also finds that metric. So what I requested initially was that should all be consistent. And the reason I don't prefer the developed area definition is because there are a lot of things that you could change to an area that could affect the hydraulics positively. For instance, if you do a development and you plant a lot of trees, that actually abstracts a lot less water. You'd have less water that's actually running into your system. So the developed area to me is an inconsistent metric for your impacts. And a lot, if we get to impervious cover, I think it's more clear and direct and communicative to our development partners. We're measuring just on your impacts. What we don't want is somebody who's developing an acre out of 5 acres to have to provide detention for 5 acres. We don't want somebody who's developing an acre, truly adding impervious cover of an acre off of 2 acres to have to provide detention for an acre and a half or 2 because there is some miscellaneous grading on the adjacent portions of the site. So that's where I want to kind of fine tune how we define what we use to define the detention rate.
Member Perez, do you mind if I ask some more informational questions? You're a subject matter expert. Mr. Upton's a subject matter expert, but most of us do not work in hydrology day in and day out. Is it okay to ask for some more information? Mr. Upton, what are the standards right now that we're using? I know there's this word of impervious cover, and then there was like disturbed ground. Can you just, what are the rules now, and what do those two things mean?
Sure, Councilman Kamkar, I'm going to step back real quick, clarify a couple items. One is we have 3 criteria. We have a small project, less than 2 acres, medium projects 2 acres to 200 acres, and large projects more than 200 acres. Those are our criteria as defined. And we've worked through several scenarios with Councilman Perez in terms of moving those around in terms of those quantities of that from 1 acre to 2 acres and 2 acres and above. Several of those smaller ones, when we're 2 acres and under, we're in agreements with. But to answer your question, Councilman Kamkar, when we start taking a look, we define it as disturbed area. And that is set forth by the engineer of record of what they're disturbing to be able to build their project. So if you have a 10-acre site and you're only going to build on 5 acres of it, then you would do your calculations associated with 5 acres of disturbed land.
So what happens with the other 5 acres? So like,
That
you
would
just don't
stay-
touch it, you leave it
Don't
alone?
touch it, leave it alone. That would be native. That would be outside of your drainage. That would stay native. If you're taking a look at a large residential area, and I'll say 99% of our engineers that are running along the way for a developed area, they just take it as the whole site, and that's on their own. We don't tell you that you have to use the full site. We tell you that it needs to be disturbed area.
So
and you
let me
define
just
that.
ask a question. So if you're doing a 20-acre development and we're going to put houses on it, the engineer, if they're using the general practice rules, would say, I'm touching everything. I'm not excluding acre here or acre there.
That's
Is that
correct.
What you're saying? Okay.
That is correct. They're using the entire site.
Now, on the impervious cover, what is that? Is that like a defined term? What does that mean?
Well, that's a definition that I mentioned earlier that as we worked with Councilman Perez and he put forth would be impervious cover associated with roads and sidewalks, so your concrete areas. And then per one of the comments that we're going back and forth that's in your packet as well is the first 7,500 square feet of a lot. So if you're
Say that again, real quick, Robert, say that first.
So you would be looking at impervious cover as roads, so a 24-foot wide road, and your sidewalks, whether it be 8-foot, 6-foot, 10-foot multi-purpose use path. And then on the lots themselves would be the first 7,500 square feet. So for example, if we take a look in our criteria now, we allow the first 7,500 square feet, so 50%, in some of our single-family infill lots right now to be able to utilize the existing detention system or roadside ditch that's there.
So,
but that's infill lots as you take a look at that. So that was the proposed definition.
One of the key items you're asking right now is, are we changing the definition of what you're counting against? Like moving the whole site or the disturbed ground or just the concrete? Is that what, is that one of the key items or not? Am I missing
that is the definition that's being discussed right now. That's before you as presented by.
Is that a significant thing or insignificant?
It's significant in how you take a look at it.
Okay, so let me throw an example here. So if we did green tea all over again, that was built in the 1670s, and we said we had to have so much drainage, under your current existing standard, you would more or less account for all the acreage because that's a residential community, and you would have to accommodate all of that acreage, right?
Well, that would be up, and I'm going to push back a little bit. That would put up to what the engineer of record determines as disturbed area. But if you want to go full boundaries, yes.
Okay. And so in this new example, if we were redoing green tea again, you would only have to accommodate drainage for where there's concrete or a pad. Is that correct?
Correct.
So in theory, that's a lesser number.
Correct.
Full site versus a portion of the site.
Correct.
I think that's the key detail in what we're talking about here. We're finding ways to reduce drainage capacity in some of these instances, and I think we should all be very wary of what that means. I'm generally uncomfortable with that. Do we have the executive master plan that was done in 2018? Can we put that on the screen, please? I believe it's the 4th or 5th page. All right, so that's that bottom paragraph there. I'd like to just read that for the record and anybody at home. So this is a master plan that was agreed to between BD4 and the city of Pearland in 2018 post-Harvey. The existing modeling results show that most of the major streams within the study area have less than a 3-year capacity. Mary's Creek provides approximately 5-year capacity in portions of Coward upwards of 25 to 5. There are a few ditches or major bayous that have higher capacity, but the majority of the existing channels provide limited conveyance. The flat terrain and low existing capacity of the major streams results in wide floodplains, resulting in large areas experiencing flooding from relatively frequent storms. They're not saying the hurricane of record. We're talking frequent. Frequent means more common than probably hurricane frequency. Is that reasonable?
That's correct, sir.
Okay. And so what are you telling us in this example in your?
So in your statement that you have that came in our master drainage plan is that we took a look at the conveyance capabilities associated with the current infrastructure that's out there from a regional perspective. And so with that running on the one-dimensional or static state model for through Half and Associates on HEC-RAS, just the hydrology model, is that it came up with a capacity in that creek of 3-year to 5-year to a couple segments in 10-year. And that's the capacity that we have in our regional infrastructure right now.
And this is pre-Atlas 14.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And so let me just finish and I'll give you all the ground. Trey. So if you have less drainage capacity on your site, where does that water go after it leaves the site?
As with any detention conveyance, it will go to roadside ditches or underground conveyance, and then ultimately to the regional infrastructure, then to Clear Creek.
And so if you're having less on your site to hold, you're sending it into the stream that you're telling me has very limited or practically no conveyance at a 3-year.
Yeah, and I mean in layman's terms, but yes, and then the aspect from that would be is that our modeling requires also when we work with DD4 is that there's no adverse impact associated with that. So you can't have a rise in the surface water elevation. So all that has to be accounted for in the H&H model, and that's why yes, you have those constraints, but we aren't going to allow the regional infrastructure of Clear Creek, Cowards Creek, Sugar, Mary's Creek, Hickory Slough rise above zero.
Right. Yeah, so I'm going to finish right here. So I just would say to this council, I am very, very uncomfortable. You should be very uncomfortable based on this study that BD4 and the city of Pearland did to reduce the on-site drainage that a user has to have. They're sending it into a creek that has probably very limited conveyance unless you're west of 288.
I think it's important to note you're talking about two completely different things. But just let me.
Go ahead.
What this is saying is in the low frequency or the high frequency events 2 to 25, that if you put more water into the system, that would have difficult conveyance. Our ponds are designed for up to the 100-year event. The release rates, we're not talking about changing the release rates.
You want to reduce the pond size.
Let me just.
You want to reduce the pond size.
Let me just finish what I'm saying.
I
think
want to get that out there.
I think your point is being made with respect to release rate. We're not talking about modifying the release rate. We're talking about the metric for which we use to determine the most extreme event and how much water is being held in there. I run hydraulic calculations that show that a 0.65 acre-feet per acre of increased impervious cover is more than sufficient for us to hold a 100-year event. And that associates with how much land we're taking from the developer in order for them to be able to manage that. The release rate would still be the same. It's just where that water surface elevation is and what we do to ensure that that is managed. But this does not affect what the master drainage plan is in really any way whatsoever.
The residents of this city should want people to have the ponds adequate to serve under today's standards, not under the standards of what a council member is calculating somewhere else and that the staff disagrees with. And that's essentially what we're talking about. The staff doesn't agree with your assertions and you're asking them to go and change the standard, and it's lesser, it's not more. If it was greater, I'd probably agree with you, but it's not greater, it's lesser.
If you'll recall, there's a uniformity of the standard that's based on a definition that's predictable. So we have the 0.65 acre-feet per acre for increased impervious cover as one metric. It just modifies to the others. So that's where we're creating the uniformity. And also, again, the intent is to create a detention criteria that, in my opinion, which is pretty significant, I've been doing this for a while, in my opinion, is relevant to the actual development and its impact. Bear in mind, like what we're doing is a master drainage plan. That's identifying areas that have historic issues. Nothing.
That's the whole city, actually. That's not a historic. That's citywide analysis in comparison with BD4.
Yeah. Again, I've been here a while, so I know what drains and what doesn't. What we're doing for the 1 acre tract right now that's empty is not affecting Twin Lakes. But what we could do is, without identifying, in my opinion, a true benefit to the overall city, we may take somebody who owns that land and prevent them from being able to develop it.
That's the cost of doing business. We are in a post-Harvey world, and I'm sorry if you have to put an extra acre in for detention. I apologize, but that's the cost of keeping people safe.
So I think we know where.
I think our attorneys may weigh in that could be a reverse taking. So just based
I think we know where we stand, and I think it's kind of getting a conglomerate of council.
Yeah. I mean, I don't hear anybody wanting to flood anyone. I don't hear anybody wanting to lessen our rates. I did hear an example of green tea, which was built way before 1994, and I use 94 for a reason. We had 2 floods in 1994, about 6 weeks apart, across the entire greater Houston area, and they became the flood of record. And almost every agency in the Gulf Coast area changed their criteria to the 94 standards. It took till about 96 to get all those standards and criteria changed. And that was the change that started requiring detention across the whole area. City of Pearland was one of the first cities in the state to actually have a detention ordinance. And so, and I go back and I've asked this question across the greater Houston area. You go to Ike, you go to Harvey, you go to even the Memorial Day flood, Tax Day flood, and all of those. And you may give me some better numbers, Mr. Perez, but in my analysis of all of that, about 95 or more % of the structures that flooded in all of those floods were built pre-94. And all I'm saying is we've done pretty good with our analysis and our drainage criteria since 1994. And even in Pearland, the vast majority, probably in that same range, 95+% of our repetitive flood losses that happen on a recurring basis were built pre-94, which means everything that we've been working on from a criteria the last 20+ years has actually been working. Now, you're going to have the one-off where a pipe gets clogged, or something happens, or actually something was designed and just didn't get built right. That's going to happen. So I do think there should be some uniformity. If we don't have uniformity in our code and in our what we're talking about here, then I think we should have some uniformity. But I also would like to know, and I see here, it's a 20-acre tract. I did ask this question of engineers. I had a 20-acre tract, and I can demonstrate through a hydraulic model that I can actually, and every tract of land is different. And I'm gonna state that every tract of land is different. Your outfall could be lower, it could be higher, which is going to affect the size of your pond. All of those kind of things are going to be up for debate when you look at a particular tract of land. But if I had a tract of land and instead of 0.65 acre feet of storage for impervious cover, I was able to demonstrate that I could do that at 0.55, which, by the way, in 94, that was the metric. And there's a lot of developments across town that were built in that time that didn't flood in all these major floods. But if you could demonstrate that through a true hydraulic model, you still can't build to that. The minimum is 6.65. So the question I would have is, if you can demonstrate it, would the city consider through the model that the city engineer would have the ability to, give that variance for 0.65, or you're really over excavating, over building, over engineering potentially, in doing so. So in other words, create a little bit of flexibility in our policy. But I do think from code to code should be consistent.
Mayor,
that's all.
I think you make an excellent point. The city of Houston, Harris County have changed over to the Atlas 14 data in terms of rainfall amount. Where is the city of Pearland in regards to that? Trent or Mr. Upton, where's our standard that we're applying today?
So currently, right now, Councilman Kamkar, is that we are still within regards to our current standard that was developed under TSARP, which would be the Allison storm.
So what is the number of inches in a 24
So 13, so we're at a 100-year event is about 13.5-ish, 13.3 inches that we use for a 100-year event versus the 17 and a half, 18 inches right in there. 17 and a half is about where we are in relation to that zone.
We're a little behind then. Our standards, to the point of
Sir,
coherence, we're not cohering with where we need to be going.
So let me
roughly speaking.
Let me rephrase that a little bit. So with regards to that, our standards have always been a little higher because we build to a 3-year event and a 5-year event, whereas our surrounding areas build to a 2-year event on conveyance. So taking a look at that, you could say, well, when I run the numbers and go from there, our 3-year event matches a Atlas 14 2-year event. Now I can't put my name and stamp it and sign that because we haven't run those numbers. But I'm just saying is that those are some of the comparisons that we need to head for, and those are one of the recommendations, as you saw in our memo to you here, is that further analysis needs to be done. A lot of our other sister surrounding areas are doing that. Brazoria County is evaluating all that criteria right now in regards to Atlas 14. We're seeing those detention rates be moved up. Is it always
not
compromised?
Down.
Yes.
They're moving up, not down.
Correct.
And in this instance, we're asking to move down. For lack of a better word, generally speaking, we're asked to remove the standard down.
No, not really.
Go ahead.
Can I let the gentleman answer cleanly?
And the reason why I'm not coming out and just going yes or no, the answer statement is that you're depending on how you define what the definition is. Right. So if you take a look at the definition, then how you define disturbed area or how you use impervious cover, those are critical components associated with any drainage calculation. And that's what Councilman Perez and I will both agree with. It's how you define that. If you want to say you want 0.65 or 0.55 or 0.7, all those play in, but it's how you define what you're going to use as input of what disturbed or impervious cover is, and also time of concentration as you bring those flows in. Those are variables in the model. So to answer that question, Councilman Kamkar, is to say, I want you to be 0.7 or 0.65. That's a component, not as critical.
Are we moving away from what our partners to the north are doing?
Our partners to the north, for example, we'll say City of Houston is moving up. They're using 0.55 acre feet, and then if they get up to a certain size development, they revert to Harris County flood control, which will run at 0.65. Brazoria County right now is analyzing in their draft stages at 0.65.
You're talking about the definition of what you're covering for the detention pond.
You're talking about how many acre feet per acre of land.
I mean,
now,
they're at 0.75. Well, and let me clarify because I have to deal with this more often than you do. With City of Houston, Harris County has forced the other communities to follow their criteria. Their criteria, which was, in my opinion, reactionary, not built on hydraulic analysis, was to arbitrarily increase. And others are using that as a rationale to arbitrarily increase, rendering certain tracts undevelopable without what we can consider true justification as to how that benefits the community. So,
are we worried about the families, or are we worried about the business?
Let me finish my point.
If it's not the families, then we have a problem.
Alex, please, let me finish my point.
Please, let's have a little decorum on the dice, okay? Yeah. If somebody's talking, stop interrupting.
Mayor, this is a serious matter.
No,
you don't. You're
it is.
On behalf of the families,
guys,
and you know what? We might as well shut it down because this is a very
serious.
Guys,
I'm calling this meeting to order.
Let's just
nobody.
Say.
No, hang on. No. I absolutely disagree with you. Nobody is trying to talk against the families in this community. I understand, council member, where you're at, but a professional is trying to answer a question. He gave you the floor. You said you gave it back, and then you're trying to continue to take it back. That's not fair.
I think with respect to where we are, Robert and I have had long discussions.
In 2 minutes, this meeting is going to be over.
Yeah. Robert and I have had long discussions. We both have the same intent. We have a difference in opinion of how it's defined. We felt like it was best to get council's involvement to help break the tie of how it's defined. I get where you're at. You're not on the same page as me. I think that's fine that you're right. I think what we need to do now is just get some input from the other council members so staff has some direction. I don't know that we're going to benefit from a whole lot of additional conversation on the fine points of hydraulics at this point.
Any other questions, comments from council?
One quick comment, Mayor. I look at this chart, and I'm going to have to go with the collective wisdom of the chart, and I can't with the collective wisdom of two.
Fair enough. Questions? I'm going to call this meeting adjourned at 9:54 p.m.